Chapter 1060. I won't explain any further. Tonight, the updates will resume as per normal. 2 chapters as a foundation, 3 chapters later. The pretty boy of the Empress's family will resume updating tonight. Currently typing, please wait a moment. After the content has been updated, please refresh the page to receive the latest update. Chapter 1061. Lan City, the Palace. Ren Baqian's face was very ugly. He thought that Hua Er had gone out to play again. This wasn't the first time this had happened, so he wasn't too worried. Even after Zhu Hua woke up and found out that she had been knocked out in the middle of the night, he still felt the same. However, after searching Lan City for 4 hours without finding any trace of Hua Er, his face began to turn ugly. Not only were the palace guards mobilized, but the Public Order Bureau and the Department of Inspection were also mobilized. Under such circumstances, Hua Er was nowhere to be found after 4 hours, which could only mean one thing: she was no longer in Lan City. He glanced at Zhu Hua, who still looked like a retard. That metal vase weighed 30 to 40 kilograms, and Hua Er didn't know how to control her strength and almost smashed her into an idiot. It seemed like someone else would have to look after Hua Er. Ren Baqian rubbed his forehead. The most important thing now was to find Hua Er. There were 3 gates in Lan City, but Hua Er definitely didn't leave through the city gates since the city walls couldn't stop her. Where would she go? The most likely place was where he had taken her. Mount Zhongshi's laboratory, the imperial capital, and the Yun nation. Given Hua Er's liking for fun, she was most likely heading east. Nowadays, there were 200 to 300 tractors and trucks heading from Lan City to the Yun nation every day. Hua Er could hide in any of the vehicles and reach the Yun nation. Ren Baqian got up to look for the Empress. He needed the Empress's warrant to mobilize the winged cavalry, so he ordered them to search in 4 directions. At the same time, he had to call Zidonglai and ask him to arrange for people to search the Yun nation. To be precise, they had to search Yanghua, Yujiang, and Pingdu with these 3 cities as the center. The highway would pass through these 3 cities and end in Pingdu. The train also had stations in these 3 cities. At this time, Ren Baqian didn't expect Hua Er to sneak onto the train. After all, the train station was located in a remote place outside the city, and Ren Baqian felt that it was most likely that she had sneaked into one of the trucks. However, just in case, he still asked someone to contact the people on the train that had already left and searched the train. After making these arrangements, Ren Baqian had to wait for news in the palace. He was a little worried. Although Hua Er was at the Kismet Heaven level, she hadn't learned any martial arts and was far from being a match for an Earth-level expert. In addition, she had never been outside and could be deceived with just a few words. If she encountered a bad person, she would probably suffer a lot. At this time, Honeysuckle was surrounded by neatly arranged straw sacks. Only the top of his head could see the light. The environment wasn't very good, but she didn't care. Her face was still full of excitement. She grabbed a dried bird from the bag and started to chew on it. Even the bones were crushed and swallowed. Just now, he was hiding in an empty soft sleeper compartment, but someone checked and he was almost discovered. She ran along the roof of the car and finally into this container. The container was filled with bags of sweet potatoes, which filled up more than half of the truck. Hua threw a few bags of sweet potatoes to the side and made a nest. Honeysuckle sat there for a day and a night, stopping a few times in between. Every time, Honeysuckle would stick his head out to look. The next morning, Honeysuckle saw a lot of people getting off the train and walking out. Some people even opened the boxes on the side to move goods down. He was immediately tempted. She didn't know where she wanted to go, so she would go wherever others went. Hua found an opportunity to sneak off the train when no one was paying attention. Then he followed the crowd and snuck out. However, as soon as he slipped out, he was targeted. Princess. A group of soldiers recognized Honeysuckle at a glance. After all, she was only wearing the same clothes. Furthermore, her figure was special and much more muscular than ordinary people. Even though most of it was covered by the clothes, it could still be seen if one looked carefully. Those who didn't know better might think that she was wearing soft armor underneath, but it couldn't be more obvious in the eyes of those who knew. Honeysuckle looked blankly at the people in front of her and didn't know what they were going to do. "Princess, please come back with us." A captain smiled warmly at Honeysuckle. Unexpectedly, Honeysuckle's expression changed drastically. She punched him in the eye and ran away at an extremely fast speed. Even an ordinary horse couldn't catch up to her, let alone an ordinary soldier. However, her destination was immediately seen by others. Was Yujiang City? Ren Baqian received a call from the Protectorate of the Northeast and was relieved to hear that they had found traces of Honeysuckle. Where is she now? In Yujiang City. My men have found traces of her, but they are still following her for fear that she will run away again. Zidonglai's voice came from the other end of the line. Thank you. Ren Baqin thought for a while and said, let the experts keep an eye on her. As long as she isn't hurt, I will set off immediately. After hanging up, Ren Baqin finally felt a little more relaxed. He had finally found that girl. Although he wanted to catch her back, he wasn't in a hurry. It would be fine as long as someone kept an eye on her and didn't let her get hurt. Although he was angry that she ran away without permission, he could rest assured that she was safe now that he had found her. He would take this opportunity to make her suffer a little and learn a lesson. Ren Baqin headed to the bedroom. At present, the sky above the palace seemed to be covered by dark clouds. Not only was it pressing down on the palace, but it was also pressing down on everyone's hearts. Everyone in the palace didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Ren Baqin ignored this oppressive atmosphere and walked into the bedroom. He didn't beat around the bush and said, I found her. She's in Yujiang City. She knew that the Empress was also very worried. She could tell from her aura that was pressing down on the entire palace. Let Zidonglai catch her back. I will teach her a good lesson, the Empress said through gritted teeth. However, she withdrew the terrifying aura that was pressing down on everyone's hearts. Qing Yuan and Hong Yuan finally felt a little more relaxed. It was very frightening to be around such an empress. There's no hurry. Let her suffer a little outside and suffer a little. I will set off now to bring her back, Ren Baqin said. After Ren Baqin finished speaking, he added, even if you come back, don't beat me up anymore. This little girl has her own ideas and might even run away from home again. The empress snorted and didn't refute him. Punish her with writing essays for a month to hone her temperament, such as the 1,000-character classic, the 3-character classic, and the poems of the Tang and Song dynasties. Go and come back quickly. The empress waved her hand unhappily. Got it? I will be back soon. Ren Baqin leaned over and kissed the empress's red lips. It was slightly cold and soft, and a delicate fragrance assailed his nostrils. At this time, Hua had already arrived in Yujiang City. He was excited to see the streets full of pedestrians and unfamiliar shops. He ran and jumped around the streets of Yujiang City. Hua carried his bag of snacks. The bag, which was originally as tall as a person, was more than half empty. He couldn't bear to eat it, but he smelled the aroma coming from the restaurant next door and went in without thinking. Young lady, how many people? The child stretched his head and looked behind Hua. Just me. Hua found a table by the window and looked expectant. What delicious food and wine do you have here? Bring them all up. The waiter sized her up. She wasn't an ordinary child and wondered which family she was from. However, he didn't pay much attention to her. This kind of young lady who sneaked out to play definitely wasn't here to eat and dash. All right. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1062. It didn't take long for 3 dishes and 1 soup to be placed in front of Honeysuckle. Although she said that all the delicious dishes would be served, her son wouldn't be so stupid as to do that. Although the amount of food wasn't big enough, it was enough for 2 people. Only for ordinary people. There was a plate of fish, half a bird, a plate of ingredients, and a bowl of soup. In addition, there was also a pot of 100-flower wine. Honeysuckle was also hungry. She quickly cleaned half of the table and then burst into tears. This time, not only the people in the restaurant, but even the street was alarmed. Thinking about it, such a beautiful girl was already very attractive. But then she burst into tears in the middle of eating, and her voice was very loud. The shopkeeper and the waiter were sweating profusely. Little girl, what's wrong? Don't cry first. It hurts. Honeysuckle pointed at her throat. Her eyes were red and tears fell down. The shopkeeper looked at her. What was going on? Looking at the little girl's clothes and appearance, she definitely wasn't from an ordinary family. If something happened to her in the restaurant, her family wouldn't be able to bear the responsibility. Go invite the doctor from Daiji Hall over, the shopkeeper hurriedly said. Daiji Hall was only 3 shops away from this restaurant, so it was very close. Everyone looked at the table as if it had been swept by a gust of wind. How many minutes had it been? Half of the table was empty. Looking at the remaining half of the fish and the little girl's appearance, someone tentatively said, Little girl, did the fish bone pierce your throat? Hearing this, many people felt that this was the case. They immediately laughed and said, Little girl, you haven't eaten fish before? Yujiang City was close to Yujiang and was rich in Yuhu fish, so there weren't many people who hadn't eaten fish before. Honeysuckle continued to cry. What was fish? She had never eaten fish before. Although the fish bone wasn't hard, her mouth could withstand it, but her esophagus couldn't and was immediately pierced. The waiter brought a doctor in his 40s. After asking about the situation, the doctor was also a little speechless. He asked Honeysuckle to open her mouth and poke the back of her throat with a chopstick. Honeysuckle felt uncomfortable, and then directly punched the doctor more than a meter away. "Why are you hitting people?" The shopkeeper was shocked. Honeysuckle couldn't care less about what he said. He bent over and began to retch, spitting out everything he had eaten. Even the fish bones were gone. Honeysuckle finally felt a little better. The shop was in chaos. Honeysuckle's punch caused the doctor to spit out a mouthful of blood. Everyone was aghast. The little girl looked to be 7 or 8 years old and looked like a porcelain doll. Her hands were so strong. The waiter and the shopkeeper hurriedly sent the doctor back to the pharmacy. When the shopkeeper returned, he saw that Honeysuckle had already changed a table and was slamming the table at him. "Bring out the good dishes and wine, I don't want the one just now." Honeysuckle felt bad that he had to spit out the food he had just eaten, but he was also scared of the fish. He did not forget to ask the shopkeeper to give him something to eat and drink. The shopkeeper's face darkened. "Little girl, why are you hitting people? He even injured the doctor. In other words, you'll have to pay up." Honeysuckle was at a loss and felt wronged. "He poked me with his chopsticks and made me uncomfortable." "He's treating you? Didn't you get poked by the fish bone? He's helping you get the fish bone out." The shopkeeper looked at Honeysuckle carefully and realized that she did not seem to be pretending. She really did not seem to be very sensible. Looking at her age, it seemed that she had been spoiled since she was young and did not understand these things. Being poked in the back of the throat with chopsticks was a bit of a reaction. Then he sighed. "Forget it. From the looks of it, Dr. Lu needs to rest for a few days. Pay up and I won't report this to the authorities." Honeysuckle continued to be at a loss. She did not understand most of it, but she did understand one thing. She seemed to have injured that person, but she had used so much strength to play with the Roaring Emperor, and the Roaring Emperor was not injured. Good food, good wine. Honeysuckle's heart was most concerned about this matter. Seeing that she was not in a good mood, the shopkeeper did not say much. He thought that it would be enough to let the little girl pay up later. The main thing was that the little girl had injured that person with a punch. It made him realize that the other party was not only from a rich family, but also a martial arts practitioner. He did not want to offend her family. He ordered the food and wine to be served. This time it was beef, mutton, and mushroom soup. He did not dare to serve her anything with bones. Honeysuckle ate at 6 tables in a row before she finally felt less hungry. Most of the ingredients in the palace were full of vitality. Even the beef and mutton were of the highest quality. 1 kilogram of meat contained the vitality of several kilograms of ordinary meat. Not to mention there were often earth-wheel-level beasts as ingredients. Outside it was completely different. However, Honeysuckle was very happy. She had eaten more delicacies than in the palace. After eating, she sat there and drank jar after jar of wine. After a few jars of wine, the shopkeeper could not sit still anymore. He had been waiting for her family to look for her, but after waiting for the whole afternoon, he saw that she still wanted to drink. He came up and asked, "Little girl, when will your family come to pick you up?" Honeysuckle shook her head. She was most afraid of being found by her father and mother. "May I know which family this young lady is from?" Honeysuckle continued to shake her head. "Then where is your family?" Honeysuckle still shook her head. To put it simply, she did not know anything. The shopkeeper did not know whether she didn't know or didn't want to answer. He guessed that it was the latter. Seeing this, he gritted his teeth and said, "Little girl, you better pay for this meal and the money for injuring Dr. Lu. The medical fee for injuring Dr. Lu is 2 taels of silver. You ate 24 dishes and drank 5 jars of potpourri, which is 4 taels of silver. That's a total of 6 taels of silver." Honeysuckle stared at him with her eyes wide open. "What money?" The shopkeeper also stared at her. The two of them stared at each other. The shopkeeper had a bad idea and asked, "Little girl, do you have money?" Honeysuckle looked at him, then at the hall that was once again full of people. She asked loudly, "Who wants to buy me a drink?" The restaurant suddenly became quiet. Everyone had noticed this earlier. After all, such a little girl drinking alone had aroused many people's curiosity. Hearing this, everyone was a little confused. What did this mean? On the contrary, the shopkeeper's face turned black. He asked in disbelief, "Little girl, do you have money?" Honeysuckle didn't look at him. Instead, she looked at the people in the restaurant with anticipation. Seeing that no one wanted to buy her a drink, Honeysuckle didn't know what was going on. Previously, when she sneaked out of Lawn City, the people in the restaurant all wanted to buy her a drink. With a blank look, Honeysuckle felt that something was wrong. She looked at the shopkeeper and asked, "What is money?" The shopkeeper almost spat out a mouthful of blood. The person in front of him didn't even know what money was? The surrounding people immediately burst into laughter. This little girl was indeed spoiled. She snuck out to have fun and didn't even know what money was. "Shopkeeper, how much money does she owe?" someone suddenly shouted. This person was kind-hearted. He thought that if the money wasn't much, he would pay for it. This little girl looked pretty and interesting. 4 taels of silver. The shopkeeper gestured with his hand. That person immediately lost his voice. 6 taels of silver? How could it be so much? An ordinary person could only earn this much in half a year. "Shopkeeper, are you trying to cheat her of her money?" someone immediately questioned. The shopkeeper had a bitter smile on his face. This person ate the whole afternoon. 5 jars of potpourri and 24 dishes. That's 4 taels of silver. She even injured Dr. Liu from the neighboring Daiji Hall. She has to pay 2 taels of silver. This time everyone was speechless. Ate the whole afternoon? 24 dishes? 5 jars of wine? This little girl was so young. How could she eat so much? The shopkeeper was also speechless. This person in front of him was really speechless. He knew that she snuck out to have fun and that her family wasn't ordinary. If she didn't have much money, it would have been fine. But 6 taels of silver was not a small amount. "Little girl, do you have anything valuable on you? You can mortgage this first and get your family to redeem it later." Without another word, Honeysuckle took the bag that she carried with her and poured it on the table. The shopkeeper originally had some expectations, but when he saw the things that were poured on the table, he was instantly speechless. What were these things? A few dried rats, a few dried birds, a small piece of bacon, a glass jar that looked like honey, a piece of sugar cane, a few fruits. Honeysuckle generously pointed at the things on the table. "Which one do you want?" These things were all his treasures. But since he had eaten her food, he would give her whatever she wanted. The shopkeeper was on the verge of crying. "I don't want any of them." At this time, a few people walked in and realized that the atmosphere in the restaurant wasn't right. They immediately followed the gaze of the crowd. When 2 of them saw Honeysuckle, their eyes instantly lit up. "Shopkeeper, what's going on?" A man with a wretched face and rat eyes shouted. The crowd in the restaurant was originally attracted by Honeysuckle's food. When they noticed the newcomers, their expressions all changed and they looked away. When the shopkeeper turned his head to look at the newcomers, his eyes couldn't help but reveal a look of disgust and fear. "Not good. Why did these rats come?" He hurriedly waved his hand. "Nothing, nothing. I think you have something to say. If you have something to say, why don't you tell us? Which family is this little girl from?" A young man with a frivolous smile placed his hand on the shopkeeper's shoulder. He looked at Honeysuckle as if he had seen a treasure. "First, set a small goal. For example, remember, bookseller's residence." Chapter 1063. The world was complicated and there were dark corners in every city. Even under the rule of the ancient race, such a situation would occur. In fact, they might even be out of the sight of the ancient race. This was because such a situation had never occurred in the Aboriginals. On one hand, Dayo had only existed for a short period of time. In the past, the Aboriginals lived in mountain villages. On the other hand, the Aboriginals were brave and good at fighting, so there was no soil for such a group to breed. If one dared to say that they were the gang leader of the Red Planet, that they were here to collect protection fees, or that they wanted to bully the innocent, they would be beaten to a pulp by a group of uncles and aunties with knives. The customs and history of the Aboriginals were destined to produce bandits, a profession with a bright future. If the imperial court issued a plundering certificate, the simple people carrying hoes in the village or herding livestock in the wild would turn into the most ferocious bandits and rush into the surrounding countries. The Aboriginals didn't have the underworld, sects, or gutter rats at the bottom of society. However, it was completely different in the Yun Nation. In addition to the sects, there were also people outside the sects, forming another underworld. These 2 underworlds intersected with each other but belonged to completely different existences. For example, the most powerful force in the vicinity of Wuxia City was the empty cicada house. In the eyes of the ordinary people, it was a huge force that was superior to them. In fact, it was considered an upper-middle sect in the Yun Nation. In Wuxia City there were 3 other forces. They were the Snake Gang, the Boat Gang, and the Freedom Society. These 3 gangs were closely related to the ordinary people, but they were all different. Among them, the snake gang was mainly made up of snake catchers, the boat gang was made up of people who relied on the water for a living, and the Freedom Society was made up of gutter rats. They bullied the innocent, collected protection fees, stole chickens and dogs, and sold some innocent people to brothels. Almost all the despicable things in Yujiang City had something to do with the Freedom Society. The 4 people who came in were from the Freedom Society. The strongest among them hadn't reached the man-will level and was only slightly stronger than the ordinary people. Coupled with the background of the Freedom Society, it was enough for them to act like tyrants. The young man who patted the shopkeeper's shoulder was called Ping Dun. His nickname was Wild Dog, lecherous and sinister. "Shopkeeper, what's the matter? Tell us. This little girl is so pretty. Which family is she from? We can't bear to see you make things difficult for her." Wild Dog laughed. As soon as he entered the room, he saw Hua as if he had seen a treasure. It wasn't that he liked Hua, but the leader of the Freedom Society liked this girl very much. Every once in a while, someone would send one to him, but no one else had seen her. He didn't know if she was dead or something. However, there were rumors that he liked to eat children's hearts and brains. If such an exquisite girl was sent to him, he might even be able to advance further. If he couldn't, he could, he. If he could, then it, he. If he couldn't, he wouldn't, he world. If he of he in of he of him. Although this little girl seemed to be from a wealthy family, the Freedom Society was able to become one of the 3 major powers in Yujiang City. Naturally, they had their own strength. Their leader was an earthwheel expert. The ordinary and of was and of the and in of by even the he. The shopkeeper had a conscience. He knew who the other party was and wanted to brush it off. However, Wild Dog's grip became stronger. His fingers seemed to be digging into the shopkeeper's shoulder. Wild Dog's expression became more and more dangerous. With an unbridled smile, he said, "We are kind, but the shopkeeper doesn't know how to appreciate our kindness." The shopkeeper broke out in a cold sweat. He had no choice but to tell Hua what had happened. After that, he felt sorry for Hua. Look at her attire. She's not from an ordinary family. An ordinary family can't give birth to such a child. Maybe the adults in the family will come looking for her. The shopkeeper added, "I see. I'm a kind-hearted person. Let me help you." Wild Dog laughed and patted the shopkeeper's shoulder. "Little girl, how should I address you? Did you sneak out or did you get separated from your family? It's not easy for the shopkeeper to deal with you eating and dashing. Do you want me to inform your family?" Wild Dog was ready to ask about Hua's background and showed a kind smile. Hua didn't like the person in front of her. However, she also knew that she seemed to have done something wrong. She actually needed something called money to eat outside. Hence, when she heard the question, she subconsciously said, Hua. Wild Dog's smile became wider. This was not a name that a big family could give. Although the little girl was dressed well, from the name, even a squire wouldn't give his own child such a name. A nouveau riche who didn't study much. A merchant who came from a bumpkin background and earned some money. It must be her family's situation. Your family? Wild Dog's smile became even more kind. Hua shook her head. She wouldn't let her father and mother know that she was here. Wild Dog immediately imagined the scene of her and her father, who came from a bumpkin background, coming to Yujiang City and getting separated. "These are brought by you?" Wild Dog flipped through the things that Hua poured on the table. His smile became brighter. The dried rats and birds looked like they were for eating. Any family with a bit of status wouldn't let their children touch these things, let alone a girl. "Let us accompany you to find your family, okay?" As soon as Wild Dog said this, the surrounding people who had lowered their heads since they came in immediately showed a look of pity and worry. "Brother, I think her family will be here soon." The shopkeeper had only said one sentence when he was slapped in the face. "Shopkeeper, do you not want to keep this shop open or do you not want to live?" A fierce-looking young man whispered in his ear. Immediately, the shopkeeper was so scared that he didn't dare to speak. "Why did you hit him?" Hua glared at the young man angrily. She had a good impression of this shopkeeper. "You're just a little girl. How can you have money on you? The shopkeeper is asking you for money. This is something you did wrong. If you did something wrong, you have to be punished." Wild Dog laughed lightly. Hua immediately felt that the person in front of her wasn't bad. She still felt that something was wrong. She mumbled, "But I ate." "You need to pay for food, but this money should be paid by your family. Shall I bring you to find your family?" Wild Dog said. Hua shook her head. "Then what should we do?" You ate but you don't have money to pay and you're not willing to bring us to find your family. This is very difficult for me. Wild Dog was even happier in his heart, but his expression was very conflicted. Erhua naturally didn't know what to do. Not only do you not have money, but you also have nowhere to go now, right? Erhua nodded again. Wild Dog thought for a long time before saying, how about this, I'll be the middleman. You owe the shopkeeper money. You can pay when you find your family. Before that, I'll find a place for you to stay. Erhua shook her head. She didn't want to find her father and mother. Wild Dog was slightly surprised. Then he changed his way of saying, how about this, I'll find you a job. I'll take care of your food and accommodation. You can return the money to the shopkeeper after you earn it. Erhua didn't know what he meant by finding a job, but she nodded her head forcefully. The shopkeeper's face showed that he couldn't bear it. The Freedom Society often forced girls into prostitution. In his opinion, this was what the other party was planning. Even if this little girl was young, she would become an extremely beautiful girl after a few years and could be sold for a good price. But he didn't dare to say it now. He only regretted it in his heart. If he knew this would happen, he would rather not have the 6 tails of silver. Then follow me. Wild Dog stood up with a smile and patted the shopkeeper's shoulder. He looked at him with a sinister gaze and said in an extremely happy voice, Shopkeeper, you don't have any objections to what I said, right? Erhua kept her snacks and said to the shopkeeper very seriously, I'll give you the money. When they left the restaurant, the shopkeeper seemed to have lost all his strength and sat there paralyzed. The others were also silent. Although this wasn't the first time they heard about this, seeing such a beautiful little girl fall into the hands of those rats made them feel suffocated. But what could they do? I'll report it to the authorities. Someone whispered. Immediately someone pulled him back. If reporting to the authorities was useful, would the Freedom Society be so savage? You'll be the first to die. Everyone became even more silent. First set a small goal such as 1 second. Remember, bookseller's house. Chapter 1064. On the street, in a restaurant not far away, a few men with thick limbs and ordinary clothes were drinking by the window. One of them looked out of the window and focused his gaze on a few people in the crowd. After a while he said, It's those rats from the Freedom Society. I wonder where they tricked a little girl from. Another person looked out the window and said, What a pity. It looks like he's from a rich family. These rats are getting bolder and bolder. Should we do something about it? These people were from the Snake Gang, and the one who spoke was a small leader of the Snake Gang. He was at the initial stage of the man-will level and naturally didn't care about the people from the Freedom Society. Forget it, don't be a busybody. Old Fu is getting more and more difficult to deal with these 2 years. Old Man Fu was the helper of the Freedom Association. Although the boat gang was slightly stronger than the Freedom Association, the strength of the boat gang's leader was a level lower than Old Man Fu. Naturally, he was unwilling to provoke the Freedom Association for other matters. On the roof of a building not far away, a man wearing leather armor sat on the roof. His eyes were like a hawk's as they fell on a few people in the crowd. Honeysuckle's confusion had disappeared. He looked at the crowd and the shops on both sides of the street with excitement. She didn't know where to go anyway, so she was tricked by a few simple words. If Renbachin knew about this, he wondered what kind of expression he would have. Wild Dog asked Erhua a few questions from time to time, mainly to find out her background. But every time he asked about this, Erhua would shake her head. Seeing this, Wild Dog didn't ask any further. From the other party's name and the things he brought, it didn't seem like he had any background. He believed that he was good at reading people. Otherwise he would have died in some corner long ago. As for what he was doing now, it wasn't the first time he was doing it. It was just that in the past he sold it to a brothel. This time he only needed to give it to the gang leader. In his heart he was thinking about what kind of reward such a high-quality person could receive. Would it be gold or some precious cultivation method? No matter what, he would be able to enter the gang leader's eyes. This last point was just as important as the previous rewards. He brought Honeysuckle to where the Freedom Society was located. It was a courtyard with 3 entrances and 3 exits in the east of Yujiang City. The surrounding area was where the Freedom Society was located. Wild Dog, who is this? The 2 guards at the door were surprised to see 2 Blossom. Even though Honeysuckle was beautiful, she was still young. Not everyone was a lolicon. Sect leader will probably want to see her. Wild Dog's words were not subtle, the 2 of them immediately understood. Bringing Erhua to a courtyard, Wild Dog smiled warmly at her. You can rest here first. Then she gave a look to the left and right, asking them to look at her. The courtyard wasn't big and was even a little run down. It was used to look after children like 2 flowers. There were still 2 guards in the courtyard. Wild Dog smiled and asked someone to send Hua in before he left. Doubtlessly, Hua did not know any of this. When he was sent into the house, he felt that it was very small and could not be compared to the palace. However, she didn't care. Instead, she was thinking about where to go tomorrow. You want to see the gang leader? The gang leader is cultivating and has no time to see you. Wild Dog, who was eager to take credit, was rebuffed. When will the gang leader come out? I found some good stuff, Sect Master will definitely like it. Go look for Deacon Lin. Wild Dog didn't even have the chance to see the leader of the Freedom Association. Although he could flaunt his prowess in front of ordinary people, he was only at the middle and lower levels of the easygoing society. At most, he was a small leader with only a few people under his command. Therefore he took it for granted. If it wasn't for the good stuff, he wouldn't have been able to see Deacon Lin whenever he wanted to. After a while, he met with Deacon Lin and only received a sentence, "Let's talk tomorrow." Not long after, Hua heard a faint sobbing sound that seemed to be nearby. Curious and excited, she couldn't fall asleep, so she pushed the door open and went out. There was no one in the courtyard who sent her here. Instead, there were 2 men in black. When they saw her push the door open, their faces immediately turned cold. Who allowed you to come out? Get lost. Hua didn't react and pointed at herself doubtfully. One of the men, who was about 40 years old and had a scar on his face, walked toward her with a grin and said, "Of course it was you. Who else could it be? Little bastard, since you are here, you better stay here obediently." Although Hua was young and insensible, she could understand what was being said and could tell the attitude of others. When she saw the grin on this man's face, she immediately raised her eyebrows and felt very angry. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. If Rinpoche saw her expression, he would definitely find it very familiar. The Empress always had this expression when she wanted to kill someone. With a grin on his face, the man reached out to grab Hua's head and pushed her forward. Seeing that the man was going to grab her head, Hua became even more furious and rammed her head into him without thinking. Bang! The man flew backward and spat out a mouthful of blood in mid-air. The other man was shocked. The people who were sent to this courtyard were all children, and he didn't expect that there would be an expert among them. Although he didn't see clearly, he knew that the person who sent his companion flying and spat out blood definitely wasn't an ordinary person. "Little bastard, you are courting death," the other man cursed, drew a knife from his waist and slashed at Hua. Seeing the knife, Hua was a little afraid. The other man was very fierce and had a weapon. She didn't have any combat experience. Fortunately, the other party was very slow. Hua took 2 steps back and dodged a few consecutive slashes from the other party. She didn't know what to do. Then she remembered that she had a sword. In the next second, the other party was sent flying by the 4-meter-long sword that suddenly appeared in Hua's hand, and his body was distorted in the air. Half of the wall was also sent flying. When Hua ran out of the house, 7 or 8 people had already rushed into the courtyard. When they saw the 2 people lying in the courtyard, they all cursed and rushed over with their knives drawn. Hua felt very wronged. These people all wanted to beat her up. She felt that she was being bullied. However, she had just sent a person flying with a sword, and this gave her some confidence. The small wooden sword in her hand grew bigger, bigger, and bigger. A 4-meter-long wooden sword that looked like a wooden plank appeared in her hand, and it directly stunned the people who were rushing over. Hua slapped horizontally again and again and again. It was as if she was slapping flies. The people who were rushing over were all sent flying back into the wall or out of the courtyard. More people jumped onto the wall and looked at the little girl in the courtyard who was waving the wooden plank with her eyes closed. They were all dumbfounded. "Who are you?" Deacon Lin, who rushed over, appeared in front of the door. He stared at the small figure in the courtyard and was a little puzzled. How old was this child? How could she be so strong? No matter how he looked at it, Hua was just an ordinary person. The only thing was that she was terrifyingly strong. Under the fierce gazes of so many people, Hua's face was full of grievance. She finally remembered who she was. "I'm your father." Deacon Lin was so angry that smoke was coming out of his head. He stared coldly at Hua and ordered, "Take her down." On the roof of a house not far away, a man wearing leather armor was holding a telescope and looking at what was happening here. He was originally prepared to make a move, but when he saw the wooden plank in Hua's hand, he felt that he could wait a little longer. As expected of the princess, as expected of His Majesty's daughter. Although she is young, she has the demeanor of His Majesty. The man praised with a smile on his face. First set a small goal such as 1 second. Remember, bookseller's residence. Chapter 1065. Although the words, "I'm your father," were spoken in a soft and adorable voice with a tinge of grievance and doubt, it still made Deacon Lin's face turn green. Although Deacon Lin was considered a big shot in Yujiang City, he was only at the bottom of the hierarchy in the Yun nation. However, his past had distorted his self-esteem. Therefore, at his command, dozens of people on and off the walls pounced on Hua. The scene was spectacular. However, under the force of the wooden door in Hua's hand, they were sent flying one by one. However, even though Hua waved the wooden door like a fan to fend off the flies that pounced on her, her movements revealed flaws. A person standing in the distance approached her like a shadow. His bony hand reached out to grab Honeysuckle's face. Honeysuckle was startled by the sudden appearance of the person. He could even smell the fishy smell coming from the other person's fingers. He immediately jumped back and swung his wooden sword with all his might at the person without thinking. This gave the others a shock as well. Her speed was twice as fast as before. The silhouette who had suddenly appeared thought that the other party was still a child who was just a little stronger. He wanted to take her down with one move, but the wooden sword that had suddenly doubled in speed caused panic to appear in his eyes. His body only managed to dodge halfway before he was directly slapped to the ground. Smack, smack, smack. Hua seemed to be startled and kept slapping the wooden door in her hand. When she stopped, there was only a pile of flesh and blood left on the ground. Seeing the puddle of things on the ground, Blossom burst into tears. This was the first time she had killed someone in her life. Not to mention killing someone, even those rats and birds were given to her by Hua. Hua's eyes were red and tears were dripping down her cheeks. Her mind was completely blank as she looked at the pile of flesh that originally belonged to a person. At this moment, a figure suddenly floated in front of her and kicked her head, sending her flying 7 or 8 meters away. The person who kicked her was Deacon Lin. Deacon Lin was very confident that even an advanced man-wheel expert's head would be smashed by this kick. One had to know that his boots and legs were made of iron. However, something unbelievable happened. Honeysuckle rolled on the ground, turned around and ran away while crying. Her cries were extremely pitiful. Anyone who saw it would feel sad and anyone who heard it would shed tears. However, the man on the rooftop had no intention of making a move. Instead, he was a little disappointed. The order from above was to let the little princess suffer a little and hone her skills. He agreed with this point. How could an aboriginal child be pampered like those foreigners? Furthermore, this was a princess. She was born with the strength of an earth wheel expert and bore the hopes of all the aboriginals. This Deacon Lin was merely at the pinnacle of the man-wheel level and was merely at the threshold of the earth wheel level. With the little princess's strength as an earth wheel expert at birth, she could slap him to death with a single slap. He could only watch as the wooden sword in Honeysuckle's hand shrank to the size of a palm. Honeysuckle turned around and ran away while crying. Although Deacon Lin wanted to chase after him, he realized that the other party's speed was faster than he expected. This caused him to be slightly shocked. After all, the other party was only a 7 or 8-year-old child. Not only did he not die from his kick, but he also had such a fast speed. With such strength at such a young age, he definitely didn't come from a humble background like that bastard had said. Furthermore, the door in his hand that could change its size was definitely a treasure. If he was still looking down on her just now, Deacon Lin now understood and thought, I'm in trouble. Now he only had 2 choices. The first was to let her run away and bring her family to take revenge. Although she didn't seem to have suffered much, he had given her a kick. He didn't know how serious her injuries were. According to Deacon Lin's conjecture, even if she was fine now, she definitely wouldn't be able to recover. Her family definitely wouldn't let him off. The second choice was to kill her. Then he would kill everyone who knew about this and refused to admit to it. The second choice was definitely more dangerous than the first, but he could only choose the second one. Otherwise, if the other party came looking for him and was stronger than the Freedom Sect, the sect leader would definitely hand him over. Of course, there was still a third choice, which was to give up everything and leave right now. However, he didn't even know who the other party was or what their background was. If he gave up everything in Yujiang City and fled in a sorry state, no normal person would do such a thing. Although it sounded like a long time, in reality it was only a few seconds. These thoughts flashed through Deacon Lin's mind and he directly chased after her. From his point of view, although that little brat wasn't slow and had great strength, he didn't have any tricks up his sleeves. He was definitely not a match for him. Honeysuckle cried as she ran out. She was mainly frightened. First, she had killed someone, and second, she had been kicked in the head. She had never experienced anything like this before. Honeysuckle, who was only 3 years old, had her mind completely blank. She ran all over the roof. Then, she ran all the way out of the city before rubbing her red eyes and wiping her snot on her clothes. Looking at the darkness around her, she didn't know where to go. She randomly found a direction and ran, but her speed slowed down. In just a few minutes, Deacon Lin caught up to her. He didn't say anything and directly pounced on her head, kicking Honeysuckle's head. Honeysuckle was kicked away again. While she was still in the air, Deacon Lin kicked her again and again, hitting her 37 times in a row. However, if there was a health bar above Honeysuckle's head, it would only be a few strands. Then Deacon Lin kicked another door panel. Honeysuckle was also going crazy. Although she was frightened at first, after being kicked dozens of times in a row, all that was left in her mind was anger. After landing on the ground, she rolled over and waved the door panel at Deacon Lin. Deacon Lin wasn't wrong. Honeysuckle really didn't know any tricks. However, he was wrong about one thing. The door panel in Honeysuckle's hand was too big and strong. When it was only facing him, even he couldn't find a chance to dodge it. However, Honeysuckle's speed was too fast. She chased after him, one door panel after another, chasing him and slapping him. Honeysuckle couldn't hit him, but he couldn't do anything to her either. The two of them were in a stalemate for 15 minutes. The anger in Honeysuckle's heart subsided, and her childish nature came out. She wanted to run again. However, Deacon Lin kept following her. Honeysuckle turned around again, took the door panel and slapped everywhere. The two of them fought for a long time and no one knew where they ran to. Seeing that the sky was turning bright, Deacon Lin also began to retreat. At the beginning, the two of them were fighting, and he wanted to exhaust the little girl's strength. However, after a night, the other party was still full of energy, but he had almost used up all his strength. Just now, he almost didn't dodge and was hit by the other party. He didn't know if it was an illusion, but the little girl's movements seemed to be faster, and it seemed to be a little more methodical. Just when Deacon Lin was hesitating, Honeysuckle suddenly turned around and threw the door panel at him. At this time, Deacon Lin's speed was also a lot slower, and he was almost hit by the door panel. He was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He made up his mind that he couldn't fight anymore. He would go back to pack his things and leave Yujiang City. However, when he dodged the door panel, he suddenly found that the little figure had taken this opportunity to crash into his arms. Small fists hammered your chest. In an instant, Deacon Lin didn't know how many small fists he had suffered. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Chapter 1066. In the past, Renbachin had a unique skill called the Tortoise Fist. At this moment, Honeysuckle was self-taught and automatically learned the first skill. She rushed into Deacon Lin's arms and punched him. Deacon Lin felt as if he had been hit by countless hammers. His chest bones and internal organs were almost all broken into pieces, and his blood and internal organ fragments spurted out. He flew into the air and stopped breathing. His eyes were wide open and filled with indignation. When he came out, he didn't expect to be killed by a little girl. Honeysuckle punched his chest and was stunned for a long time. She went forward to look at the lifeless Deacon, and her eyes turned red again. However, she didn't cry this time. She had experienced things that she had never experienced before, especially after being hunted for an entire night. Although her understanding of the world hadn't improved much, her temperament had changed a lot. From this point of view, Renbachin's plan to train her was a success. Honeysuckle was very hungry. She had never been so hungry since she was young, and her stomach felt like it was overturned. However, she had to find her small wooden sword first. After this night, she suddenly understood that only that toy could protect her in the outside world. After spending some time finding the wooden sword, Honeysuckle wanted to cry again. This time it was because she was hungry. Her stomach was even hungrier. Furthermore, she missed her father and mother. However, solving the problem of her stomach was more important. Although her snacks were thrown away, Honeysuckle still had a certain amount of wilderness survival experience. She had honed her skills in the garden of the palace. Butterflies? Eat them. Flowers? Eat them. Aphids? Eat them. Cicadas? Honeysuckle. Honeysuckle was in a small forest. She walked in circles, grabbing insects, flowers, and a pitiful number of berries and stuffing them into her mouth. After spending half a day, she finally felt less hungry. Honeysuckle then followed the original path. She wanted to return to the palace. She had to find the previous city before she could take the train back. The outside world wasn't as fun as she thought it would be. Not everyone was as friendly as the people at Shanhui House. However, she didn't know how far she had run last night, but she soon got lost. Honeysuckle was at a loss as she looked at her unfamiliar surroundings. After standing there in a daze for a long time, he could only choose a random direction to walk in. Behind her, the man who had watched her being chased and beaten for an entire night landed near Deacon Lin's body. With a cold smile on his face, he crushed Deacon Lin's head before continuing to follow behind her. Although the little princess was still very young, he realized that the little princess had improved a lot in one night. Chapter 1067. Rinpoche's words scared them out of their wits. In Wild Dog's heart, their powerful and ferocious gang leader was trembling like a sieve. Guangxia Literature Network. Net Your Highness, I just came out of seclusion. I don't know anything. It was these people who acted on their own and offended the princess. I really don't know anything. Old Fu's face was full of panic and despair. It doesn't matter. Rinpoche waved his hand. His simple and calm words gave Old Fu a glimmer of hope. However, the next sentence sent him into an icy abyss. Money, power, and women, you have enjoyed all that you should have, so you have no regrets in death. When I came here, I asked someone to inquire about what you have done over the years so you won't die unjustly. Rinpoche said in an extremely calm voice. He didn't even look at the people below him. Bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down Old Fu's forehead. His lips turned pale, and his eyes were filled with fear and unwillingness. However, in the next second, Old Fu suddenly jumped up, broke through the roof and fled into the distance. He didn't dare to attack Rinpoche and only hoped that he could escape. It wasn't impossible. Although Rinpoche had brought Earth Wheel experts with him, it was common knowledge that the Aboriginals were very strong, but their explosive speed was relatively average and their body techniques were even worse. If it were just these guards, it wasn't impossible for him to escape. However, Rinpoche didn't only bring the winged cavalry. Rinpoche got up and rubbed the head of Lin Xiaola, who was dozing off, and said, "Get up and get to work. Bring him back alive. I will add a chicken drumstick for you tonight." She was the cheapest spirit wheel expert. Lin Xiaola slapped Rinpoche's hand away and leaped out of the roof that Old Fu had smashed open. Within a few minutes, she returned with a black-faced and trembling Old Fu. "Your Highness, kill them all?" The guards who came with her showed a sinister smile. "Hang them. Set up a row of poles in front of the door and hang them all." Rinpoche's words decided the fate of everyone in the Freedom Club. The people of the Yun Nation wouldn't be dissatisfied with killing a gang like the Freedom Society that did all kinds of bad things. Instead, they would be grateful. If they were all hanged outside, it would serve as a reminder to everyone. The Imperial Court of Dayo wasn't like the Imperial Court of the Yun Nation, which couldn't control the local government and allowed some thieves to collude with the officials to commit crimes. When City Lord Yujiang rushed over with a head full of sweat, he saw corpses hanging on poles, fluttering like banners. There were over 100 of them. Fu Zizai is also hanging on it. Other than Lin Xan of the Zizai Society, everyone else is there, a scholar said to him in a low voice. When the soldiers accompanying City Lord Yujiang saw this scene, there was a slight commotion. "Everyone be quiet and wait here obediently." City Lord Yujiang turned around and gave the order. He tidied up his clothes and hurriedly entered the Freedom Society's lair. He couldn't help wondering why Zhao Prince Consort was here. He was almost scared to death when he heard that Zhao Prince Consort had come here and was heading straight for the Freedom Association. When he saw the corpses hanging outside, he knew that the Freedom Society must have somehow offended this top figure. Otherwise, a small power like the Freedom Society wouldn't have caught his eye. The question was, how did these rats provoke him? A moment later, Rinpoche saw him. "Yu Qingdong pays his respects to your highness." He glanced at him and said faintly, "Your Yujiang city is really a place that harbors evil. Don't tell me that you don't know? I'm guilty of dereliction of duty." Yu Qingdong didn't dare to defend himself. He lowered his head and didn't dare to wipe the sweat from his eyes. Rinpoche was just giving him a warning. He knew that these rats could be found everywhere. Once a batch was killed, another batch would pop up. Besides, other than the Freedom Society, everything else in Yujiang City was in order. Yu Qingdong was considered a talent, so he naturally wouldn't make things too difficult for him. It's good that you know that you are guilty. If there is a next time, I will only see your head. Yes, yes. I know my mistake. Yu Qingdong repeatedly responded, even though he didn't know what Renbachien meant by, there is a next time. Renbachien asked his men to bring a few boys and girls between the ages of 4 and 10. Everyone was full of fear. Renbachien looked at them and couldn't help but give them another warning. This freedom society abducts and deceives children just to dig out their hearts to drink. Such people can actually live until now. Yu Qingdong's forehead was sweating again. It's my dereliction of duty. You even dare to have designs on the princess, huh? Renbachien sneered with a murderous look. Yu Qingdong almost collapsed to the ground when he heard this. The princess came to Yujiang City? The Freedom Society dared to have designs on the princess? If I knew that you were so eager to die, I would have sent you to the netherworld. I will spare your life this time. Send these children to settle down and find their families. Renbachien waved his hand. Yu Qingdong made arrangements for these children and held a banquet at the warlord's residence. This time Renbachien didn't refuse. After giving them a warning, he met with the local officials at an appropriate time to let them do their work with peace of mind. Although he came for Air Hua, he also had to represent the court's attitude. The next evening Renbachien stood on the second floor of a restaurant on Guan Road and looked down. Air Hua was right below. At this time Air Hua was dirty, had stains on her small face and her clothes were a little torn. Most importantly, she was surrounded by a few young beggars. Renbachien didn't expect that in one night, Air Hua would actually recruit a few young beggars and become the chief of the beggar sect. It was said that in a temple outside the city last night, Air Hua snatched the sleeping quarters of a few young beggars and showed off her skills. She was immediately regarded as a celestial being by those young beggars. In the alley diagonally opposite the restaurant, 2 flower and 5 little beggars were facing 3 or 4 adults. Both sides were talking about something, and it seemed like they were fighting over territory. Among beggars, this kind of situation was very common. Air Hua didn't know what the other party said, but she seemed very angry. She then rushed over and punched and kicked those beggars to the ground before leaving the alley with a few cheering young beggars. The princess has finally learned to talk with her fists. The imperial guards standing beside Renbachien were so touched that tears almost fell from their eyes when they saw this scene. These imperial guards had watched Air Hua grow up. In the past she only used her fists to cause trouble, but now she had finally learned to fight for territory with her fists. Renbachien's mouth twitched. Was this something to be happy about? However, looking at Air Hua's dirty appearance, Renbachien felt a little suffocated and distressed. Although Air Hua often rolled on the ground and dug tunnels in the palace, making her look like a muddy ball, that was completely different from what she was doing now. Renbachien really wanted to rush down now, give Air Hua a good bath and let her have a good meal. He thought that she hadn't eaten well for the past few days. However, he suppressed this urge because he wanted to see more. The rats in Dayo mainly ate grass roots for a living and were much cleaner than those from the Yun nation, which ate everything. Go and buy a few roasted chickens. Renbachien ordered the guards below. The guard was very fast. In less than 10 minutes he brought back 5 roast chickens and a large piece of beef. Break the roof and throw it in. Let them know that roast chicken can fall from the sky. Don't let Air Hua find out. Otherwise I'll deduct your allowance, Renbachien instructed as he raised his chin. Only Lin Xiaola was qualified for this task. With the speed of the aboriginals, the roof would probably collapse if she jumped onto it. The guards below found it a little funny. It was Her Highness who said that he wanted to train the princess, but she was more nervous than anyone else. However, they still kept an eye on the situation in the temple. Lin Xiaola waved her small fist at Rinpochen and stuffed a chicken leg into her mouth. Rinpochen kept staring at her with a murderous gaze. Hua was still hungry, yet she actually snatched his chicken leg? Do you still want to get paid in the future? After eating the chicken leg, Lin Xiaola landed on the roof of the dilapidated temple and found a gap to throw the bag of food down. Before Hua could rush out to check, she had already disappeared into the darkness. A moment later, there was a burst of cheers in the dilapidated temple. For the next few days, Rinpochen and his men kept an eye on Hua in the dark. During this period, Hua always felt that someone was watching him and almost discovered Rinpochen and his men a few times. Hua has even learned how to counter surveillance. Rinpochen hid behind the window of a restaurant with a gratified look on his face. Well, Rinpochen's perception was purely an illusion. After all, the gazes of this group of people were too fixed on him. Anyone with a little more sensitivity would be able to detect it. Your Highness, there are more than 20 beggars in front. I'm afraid they are here to cause trouble for the princess. A guard whispered into Rinpochen's ear. Rinpochen nodded slightly and continued to observe from behind the window. Behind him was a group of guards who were peeking their heads out. A group of people squatted behind the window like fools. Below, Hua clasped her hands behind her back and looked at the people on the street with longing in her eyes. She especially looked at the children whose hands were held by the adults at home. She missed her father and mother a little. She was very distressed because she didn't know how to go back. She also didn't know if her father and mother would find her. She simply didn't expect that her biological father had been hiding in the dark and following her for many days. On the other hand, those little beggars were scattered on the street looking for people to beg for money. They were often scolded and sometimes beaten, but that was when she had to step in. She was the one who took care of those little brothers and only she could beat them. She had already discovered that the people here weren't as strong as the people inside and outside the palace. They could be said to be very weak. Even the people on the street that she had seen when she sneaked out of the palace were much stronger than the people here. While she was letting her imagination run wild, she suddenly heard a shout coming from nearby. She turned her head and saw her little brother, Fuji, being kicked and trampled on the ground. Many people wearing patched clothes were looking at her. What are you doing? Let go of Fuji. Hua fearlessly took a few steps forward and shouted in an indistinct young girl's voice, sounding a little angry. It's this little bitch. A beggar pointed at Hua and scolded. On the second floor, Rinpochen's eyes flashed, and the many guards behind him emitted a cold, murderous aura. Little bastard, kowtow to me a few times and I'll let him go. The leader of the beggars was very strong and sneered at Hua. At this time, a few other little beggars also ran behind Hua and looked worriedly at Fuji who was being stepped on. Although they were a little scared and their legs were trembling, they didn't run away. What's kowtowing? Hua looked blankly at the few little beggars around her and asked. I'll kowtow to you and you'll let Fuji go. A skinny little girl bit her lip and shouted at the other side. Who do you think you are? Hurry up and kowtow, or I'll trample him to death. The beggar who was stepping on Fuji's back said viciously. Boss, don't worry about me. Run. Call me Dad. Hua stubbornly corrected the way she addressed him. What did she say? Call him Dad? A little bastard wants you to call him Dad? The beggar opposite her immediately laughed. Although Hua didn't understand a lot of things, she could feel that the other party's attitude was full of malice. The other party really didn't hide it at all. Hua didn't want to listen to them anymore. Saving Fuji was more important now. The other party looked at the toy wooden sword in Hua's hand and couldn't help but laugh. Little bastard, are you going to use this thing to defeat us? The surrounding commoners also shook their heads. This little girl was going to be out of luck. However, the next second, the laughing beggars were like chickens that had their necks pinched and they let out a sound. The toy wooden sword in Honeysuckle's hand had turned into a 4-meter-long door plank. With a whistling sound, it slammed towards them. The beggars in this world weren't like the beggars in the movie, the Condor Shooters. Although the beggar leading the group was a little strong, he was only a little stronger than an ordinary person. With just one blow, he sent the people around him flying into the shops on both sides of the street. Hua waved the sword a few times, and the people opposite her disappeared. The shops on both sides of the street were smashed into pieces, and waves of curses could be heard. As for the onlookers on the street, they were already stunned. Rinpochen stood up and stood behind the window. He knew that it was about time. After all, A wooden sword that could change its size was definitely a treasure in the eyes of ordinary people. Now that it was seen in the hands of such a small beggar, there would definitely be many people eyeing it. He wasn't going to set up a trap. That was too immoral. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising message. Honeysuckle had suffered a lot during this half a month, and educating her was something to be done when they returned home. Okay. Honeysuckle nodded and jumped out of Rinpoche's arms. She took a few steps back, stretched out her hand and drew a circle behind her. They are under my protection. Do you know what protection means? Rinpoche couldn't help but tease her. They pay me protection fees and I stand up for them. Honeysuckle raised her small face and said proudly. Who taught you that? Rinpoche raised his eyebrows. Oh, there wasn't such a thing. Brother Rinxia. Rinpoche sneered. That guy was dead meat. Honeysuckle seemed to have thought of something and suddenly ran back to the rundown temple. She came out with a broken bowl and raised it in front of Rinpoche. The best is for Dad. Rinpoche immediately beamed with joy. In the past, Honeysuckle never shared any with him when she was eating rats. It had only been half a month and she was already so sensible. He took the slightly greasy bowl and looked at the messy things inside. There was also a strange smell. Even though Rinpoche didn't want to eat it at all, he looked at Honeysuckle's expectant eyes and tilted his head back to pour it in. It had to be said that this was a kind of happy pain, or a kind of painful happiness. Rinpoche's stomach churned after pouring the bowl into his mouth. He had never eaten such terrible food since he was young. However, he still smiled at Honeysuckle in appreciation. Then, he looked at Honeysuckle with a black face and excitedly ran over to fill another bowl for him. Rinpoche handed the bowl to the guard behind him and said to Honeysuckle with a smile, Everyone has been looking for you for the past few days. They have been working very hard and are still hungry. The guard who took the broken bowl was at a loss. He wanted to say that he was full, but he pinched his nose and swallowed the food when he met the little princess's clear gaze. Honeysuckle then apologized to the guard behind him and said, They haven't eaten yet. This is all. It's okay, we can still hold on for a while. Everyone felt as if they had heard the sound of nature, except for the guard behind Rinpoche who looked bitter and thought, Why am I so close to him? Rinpoche patted Honeysuckle's head and said, All right, your queen misses you very much. It's time to go back. Okay. Honeysuckle nodded happily at first, then turned to look at the people behind him and asked, Are they coming along? First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Chapter 1070. Since the appearance of Rinpoche and the others, the dozens of beggars at the bottom of this world had been feeling uneasy. Although some of them would act like evil beggars and bully the obviously weak beggars in order to seize territory, everyone was the same when facing the aboriginals. They were no different from ants waiting to be judged. The only difference was that they would bleed a little more. What shocked them was the new leader. That girl, who was a few years old, was actually an aboriginal. She seemed to have a high status, at least from the looks of the young man. Then they saw the leader give the young man, who looked like a big shot, a bowl of soup that they and the others drank, which made them feel a little ashamed. After all, the leader seemed to be someone with status, yet he actually drank such unpalatable food with the beggars. Furthermore, the young man really drank a bowl of soup, even though he looked terrible. Everyone could understand that the new leader was going back with the young man. Although they were envious, the new leader was obviously from a different world from them. However, what surprised them was that the new leader, who was a few years old, actually wanted to take them and the others away. At this time, they were like people waiting to be judged, and their hearts were tangled with excitement and apprehension. Rinpoche touched Honeysuckle's head and said, They have their own lives and I will give them a chance to live like humans. However, your world isn't suitable for them and their world isn't suitable for you. Do you understand? The beggars weren't very disappointed after hearing Rinpoche's words. This was to be expected, wasn't it? Furthermore, the other party said that he would give them a chance to live like humans, which made them a little excited. If possible, who wouldn't want to live like humans? They are under my protection. They call me father. I want to take them with me. Honeysuckle didn't want to give up on his subordinates. Rinpoche raised his eyebrows. The imperial family suddenly had so many people, and he would be beaten up again when he returned. However, this was also an opportunity to teach Honeysuckle. They are too weak and can't adapt to life in Lan City. Even a child is stronger than them. They will be bullied and have a hard time living. Although you have good intentions, only here is suitable for them. The people here are also weak and they won't stand out here. This is their world. I'll protect them. Honeysuckle waved his arms stubbornly. Rinpoche raised his eyebrows. Alright, there was still no such thing. Rinpoche raised his head and scanned the crowd before lowering his head to look at Honeysuckle. He sighed and said, "The capital still lacks some janitors. If they go there you will still see them." Rinpoche comforted Honeysuckle, stood up and said to everyone, "After this I will send all of you to the capital to clean the streets. You will be paid. Although you won't be able to earn a lot of money, your life will be better than it is now. At least you won't starve to death. If you don't want to go, you can leave. If you want to go, stay. Those who are still here tomorrow morning, someone will escort you out." Initially, Rinpoche was prepared to find a random merchant association to leak some information to give these people a living. From his point of view, this was the most suitable method. However, since Honeysuckle insisted, he would let them go to the imperial capital. There was no need to say more. These people were just an insignificant part of Duo Hua's growth. "Alright, let's go." Rinpoche patted Honeysuckle, took her hand and left. "I'll go and see you. I'll take care of you." Honeysuckle turned around and waved goodbye to everyone. The others weren't as naive as Honeysuckle and knew that their worlds would probably never cross again. Although the beggars couldn't bear to part with her, their eyes were red as they bit their lips and watched Honeysuckle leave. They all knew that they weren't from the same world. Rinpoche brought Honeysuckle back to the inn and let her take a bath before changing into a new set of clothes. He had prepared all of this beforehand. The next day an imperial guard was left behind, and everyone returned to Yujiang to board the train. This trip lasted for half a month. The Empress was very unhappy with the phone calls these past 2 days. However, Rinpoche was in a good mood. Honeysuckle had grown a lot in this half a month. Sure enough, he couldn't let Honeysuckle play in the palace all the time. Through learning she could grow faster. "Why did you let them call you father?" Rinpoche asked curiously. He was very curious about what Honeysuckle was thinking. Honeysuckle took a sip of her saliva before replying in an indistinct, girlish voice, "I'm father, so I can beat them up and they can't fight back. I can also let them copy the 3-character classic, and they have to listen to me." Rinpoche's mouth twitched. Was this her definition of father? Well, it seemed like it was indeed his doing. He then seriously educated her, "The next time you beat someone up, you can let them call you father. Father is my special title." "No, father is the best," Honeysuckle stubbornly said. "Well, I'm the best." Rinpoche laughed. As Honeysuckle learned more things, her way of thinking would probably change. "Empress, I miss you." Honeysuckle pounced on the Empress and hit her stomach with her head. Then, the Empress skillfully pressed Honeysuckle onto her knees with a cold face and slapped her buttocks. After slapping her more than a dozen times, the expected crying didn't come. Honeysuckle's eyes were red and she held back her tears. She didn't make a fuss like before. Chapter 1071. Erhua went to kindergarten. Although Rinpoche hoped to build a kindergarten after moving to the capital, that would take another 3 months. Taking advantage of Erhua's absence, he sent her to the first kindergarten in this world a week after her return. Later, a second one would be built in the capital. There were about 100 children between the ages of 3 and 6 in the kindergarten, and only 1/3 of them were the children of court officials. The fertility of the Aboriginals was too low, and there were only so many children of the right age. There weren't many of them even if they were all sent here, and not everyone was willing to send them. In particular, some of the more talented ones had already started to lay the foundation at a young age, and the education at home was more in line with their plans and expectations. In other words, they believed in the hundreds and thousands of years of experience of the Aboriginals. Rinpoche also believed that they would definitely be able to cultivate a group of boorish people who would directly confront any situation. Erhua was also very excited to have so many children to play with. On the first day of school she got along with all the children. Rinpoche held the report in his hand and rubbed his forehead. There were another 100 more people in the imperial family. In just 4 hours, Honeysuckle had beaten all the children into submission. It seemed that her experience in the Yun nation made her particularly fond of winning people over by virtue. However, Rinpoche felt that Erhua wasn't just like this. She actually didn't know how to interact with other children. She wanted to play with other children, but she used a different method. Honeysuckle believed that the identity of father could control everyone. As long as someone accepted this identity, they were her people. They had to listen to her, play with her, stand on the same line as her, and be protected by her. This reminded Rinpoche of an anime character that he had seen decades ago when he was still an ordinary person. Whitebeard. Whitebeard wanted to have a family, and his dream was to create a huge family. Although Erhua had a different background and thought differently, they walked the same path. Rinpoche had a slight guess that it was probably loneliness and the desire to dominate. The latter was easy to understand. Everyone had this kind of desire, and children would express this desire even more openly. As for the former, he and the Empress spent too little time with her. Although Zhu Hua was always with her, Zhu Hua couldn't replace her parents. Rinpoche was busy, the Empress was a little arrogant, and the two of them weren't the kind of parents who were particularly close to their children. This was the result of not taking the parental work permit. Rinpoche crossed his arms and pondered for a long time. He then put this matter aside and asked someone to call Shurgan and Tong Lan over. Principal. The two of them greeted. The young people from the academy were still willing to address him this way, and he liked it. Get ready. You guys will make a trip to Great Xia. We're leaving tomorrow. What are we going to do? The two of them looked over curiously. One had to know that the plane was in the stage of preparing for its flight test. What was so important that they were asked to go to Great Xia at this time? Rinpoche didn't hide anything from them and briefly told them about the Go Home organization. Right now there is still a group of people resisting stubbornly. Let them have a taste of these 2 nuclear bombs. If they still don't surrender, let the other one hit their heads. It was only then that they realized that Principal Ren was about to unify the Great Xia martial arts world. Even Li Yuanzhu was part of this organization. Although the Aboriginals were very reckless, they still respected experts. In particular, Li Yuanzhu was ranked above His Majesty. Although all the Aboriginals believed that His Majesty could definitely kill her in a real fight, they did not believe that His Majesty could kill her. However, they had to admit that her strength was only below His Majesty's. Subsequently, the two of them became excited. Ever since they saw a nuclear bomb, there wasn't a single student who didn't think about it. Explosions were power. Over the past 3 years, the laboratory had been bombed so many times, which was enough to show that these guys were passionate about bombs. This time they could actually use nuclear warheads to blow people up, which was enough to make these 2 dishonest guys excited. Tong Lan stood up straight, looked up, and put her hands behind her back. Shurgan couldn't hide the smile on his face even though he had a full beard. Go back and make some preparations. Hand over the matters in your hands to others. Come back tomorrow morning. The people from the Department of Inspection will go with you. Someone will pick you up when you arrive in Great Xia. Understood. The two of them nodded and left. After that, Rinpoche dealt with the matters in the capital. At present, 200,000 Aboriginals and 200,000 Jing tribe people had moved to the capital. Some of the Yun Nation's chambers of commerce had also opened shops in the capital, which had completely changed the capital. However, this was followed by conflict. The Aboriginals who had moved out from the 60,000 mountains were fierce, barbaric, and had no concept of law or discipline. They were completely respectful of the strong and had caused a lot of trouble in the capital. They had injured the Jing tribe people and the people of the Yun Nation, and there were even many fights between the Aboriginals. Although Rinpoche had expected this situation, he still felt annoyed. There was really nothing wrong with other people calling the Aboriginals barbarians. If it weren't for the Empress, he wouldn't have a good impression of these troublemakers. After all, Rinpoche had grown up on Earth, a world that operated according to order most of the time, and he naturally didn't like to disrupt order. After dealing with the matters in the capital, Rinpoche strolled to a shop on Beihang Street with his guards. The 3 shops were the size of normal shops and were magnificently decorated. The words "Tavern Heaven on Earth" were hung on the door. This was a shop that Rinpoche had recently opened and he liked coming here. As a northerner, he had a special fondness for the bathhouse culture. Compared to the baths in the palace, this place was more relaxing. There weren't many people inside. Rinpoche walked in with a towel wrapped around his waist and saw Qin Chuan sitting in the pool with his hands on the edge and his eyes slightly closed. "Oh, it's your highness. What brings you here today?" Qin Chuan recognized Rinpoche without even opening his eyes. "Minister Qin." Rinpoche greeted him and sat in the pool with a scarf wrapped around his waist. The two of them briefly chatted about the situation of the Protectorate of the South in the 60,000 mountains. Recently, 2 more villages of the foreign races had been discovered, and some scouts had died. The army marked the locations and moved in other directions. After dealing with the people from Great Xia, they would gather experts to wipe them out. After the bath, the two of them swayed their bodies and went to the lounge on the second floor. There was a group of aboriginal masseurs there, and the strongest among them was at the Kismet heaven level. Although their movements were very barbaric, the effect was pretty good. More importantly, they were good-looking. Qin Chuan lay on the pure steel massage bed and gave Rinpoche a thumbs up. This place is pretty good. There are also masseurs in the capital, right? Of course. Rinpoche nodded. He was going to transfer these masseurs to the capital. After all, it wasn't easy to hire masseurs who were at the Kismet heaven level, and Rinpoche could offer sky-high salaries. After most of the departments were transferred to the capital, the middle-level and low-level officials who stayed behind wouldn't be able to use such powerful masseurs. Four-way masseurs were enough. First, set a small goal such as 1 second. Remember, Bookhouse. Chapter 1072. In a small town in the east of Great Xia was the painted screen sword tower. The entire town was like this. Everyone in the town had a certain relationship with the painted screen sword tower. For example, if an ancestor was a disciple of the painted screen sword tower, the descendant would be an ordinary person in the town. If a talented descendant appeared, he would become a disciple of the painted screen sword tower. It was the same for merchants, peddlers, night watchmen, and beggars. However, things had changed recently. There were tens of thousands of people in the painted screen sword tower, causing the small town to be overcrowded. This situation had been going on for a few months. Although no one said anything and these ordinary people and low-level disciples didn't know what was going on, everyone could feel that a storm was brewing. The center of the town was where the reception hall was called Bright Sword Hall. At this moment, dozens of people were sitting in Bright Sword Hall. These dozens of people were the top experts of Great Xia. A stomp of their feet could shake Great Xia's pugilistic world. However, with so many experts gathered together, there was only a haze. Some had anger on their faces, some were unwilling, some were deep in thought, some were smiling, and some were expressionless. However, no one was relaxed. Ma Hongyu, Golden Child, Duke Yinyu, Elders Yang and Yen are in Sunstone Town in the north. Other than them, there are about 100 disciples. Gluttonous Duke, Blood Sea Demon, Lui Zhao Zhao Zhao, and Lu Su are in Gujiao Dam. There should be more than 10 experts that haven't been discovered. Su Gongso Du Qian Gao Yi Tao Qian. 13 experts with their disciples are in Riverside Town. As names were said, the hall became even more silent. In other words, we are surrounded, right? Do they think we're made of mud? As long as we attack one place, they won't be able to stop us. When we return, everyone in the painted screen sword tower will be in their hands. So what? As long as we're alive, will they dare to kill everyone? They seem to have a way to communicate. If we attack one place, we'll be killed as long as we're delayed. Then we'll wait here for them to attack. If it were up to me, we'll wait here. They have a way, but we're not inferior either. Even if we die, we have to bite off a piece of meat from them. I don't believe that they are all united and not afraid of death. Jiang Zixi felt a headache as he listened to the quarrels of others. Although he was forced to gather here, these people were all top experts. Naturally, they would not be obedient to him. Everyone had their own ideas, so it was natural for them to quarrel. Jiang Zixi's face darkened as he recalled what Ma Hongyu had said to him. Even if what the other party said was true, Zhang Xian had no interest in participating. Chapter 1073. The people standing on the city wall knew that the other side had an overwhelming advantage in terms of strength. Other than Li Fu, who was ranked first, Qi Zixiao, and Hong Wu, who was ranked sixth, 6 out of the remaining 7 experts in the world were facing the other side. As for the top 100 experts, the other side had twice as many people as they did. However, they weren't ready to give up. Although this was not a war between races, nor was it a war of righteousness, everyone had their own beliefs in their hearts. It could be for freedom, hatred, justice, or other reasons. Although their starting points were different, those who could become the top experts in the world would definitely have their own beliefs and wouldn't be easily swayed. Moreover, the other side might not be a monolithic block. As long as they showed that they could cause a certain amount of casualties, the other side might not be willing to fight them head-on. Needless to say, they still had some tricks up their sleeves. Although they didn't have as many experts as the other side, it wasn't just the number of experts that would affect the outcome of the battle. Their joint attacks and the mechanisms in the city could also delay some of the experts and reduce some of the pressure. The people below didn't think so much and knew that they didn't need to make the first move. Some of them had seen the nuclear bomb, while others had never seen it but had heard of it. Most of them only knew that they had a killer weapon, but didn't know exactly what it was. Many people looked at the aboriginals in front of the crowd. These people had just arrived and wanted to attack, so the so-called killer weapon must have something to do with them. Qi Zixiao was the president, but he wasn't here. The second most powerful expert in the world, Li Yuanzhu, and the first most powerful expert in the world, Li Fu, were willing to be heroes. In that case, what could these aboriginals bring? This made people curious. It was said that it could destroy the world, but most people didn't believe it. Li Yuanzhu looked at the people on the city wall in the distance and didn't try to persuade them. It was useless to rely on words now. Only by showing them enough power to crush everything would they be able to calm down and reconsider what they were saying. How much longer? Li Yuanzhu's body was very straight, and she was holding an open scroll with the words Diamond Sutra written on it. She had obtained it from Zhao Prince Consort and had been reading it recently. The others were standing not far away from each other, and they looked like a plate of loose sand. However, it was impossible for them to stand neatly, and even Li Fu couldn't do it. Li Yuanzhu and the rest had already done their best to gather these people together. They're retreating. They haven't left the range yet. Tong Lan crossed her arms and calmly sized up her surroundings. Fear arose in more than one person's heart. None of them could say a word. This had completely transcended the power of a human. No one would doubt that this was an attack from a deity. Then everyone was covered in a layer of dust from the shockwave. Phew! After a long time, someone finally gasped loudly. Just now, there was only shock left in everyone's hearts, so much so that they almost forgot to breathe. If it weren't for their strength, they would have suffocated to death. What is this? Someone asked subconsciously. Nuclear bomb. Tong Lan said proudly. Every time I see it, I'm shocked. It is indeed a power that doesn't belong to the human world, Lin Dong exclaimed. Li Yuanzhu nodded slightly. She could cross more than 10 meters with one step as if she was teleporting. Step by step, she walked toward the painting in the distance. Her movements weren't abrupt at all, as if it was supposed to be so. Junrenli seems to be stronger. Ma Hongyu's eyes were filled with amazement. In the past, Li Yuanzhu might have been able to do it, but she couldn't do it so naturally. Unexpectedly, Junrenli had improved a lot in the past 3 years. At this rate, it wouldn't take many years for him to reach Li Fu's level, right? Lin Yu followed behind Li Yuanzhu. Her mind was still blank, and she didn't know where her thoughts were drifting. Following Li Yuanzhu was already a habit. The chaos on the city wall didn't stop. Jiang Zixi couldn't care less. He forced his eyes open and stared into the distance. Although everyone was almost blinded by the dazzling light just now, they could still feel the earth-shattering power. Everyone, your resistance is meaningless. Li Yuanzhu landed lightly on the city wall without the slightest worry. What is this? Jiang Zixi asked bitterly. A nuclear bomb. Li Yuanzhu whispered. Since we can place one in the distance, we can also place one on the screen. What's the point of your resistance? Mobile reading access, M. Chapter 1074. Ren Baqin sat on a chair under the shade of a tree, enjoying half a day of leisure. Not far away was Two Flower, who was chopping at the air with a double-edged axe. The double-edged axe was snatched by Two Flower, and it was hard to believe that a double-edged axe would appear in a kindergarten. However, to the aboriginals, who had been determined to fight brainlessly since they were young, nothing was impossible. On the first day of kindergarten, Two Flower fought with the aboriginals. When they found out that their children had been beaten, many parents' first reaction was to give their children a weapon like a knife or an axe and tell them to fight back the next day. Even if Two Flower was a princess. From the second day onwards, there were children carrying weapons to the kindergarten every day. Ren Baqin was shocked. However, the parents of the aboriginals spoke eloquently. This was how the aboriginals educated their children. Although they had different positions, they were surprisingly consistent and barbaric when it came to educating their children. Fortunately, those boorish people knew what they were doing. Those weapons were either unsharpened metal or wooden weapons. The double-edged axe in Two Flower's hands was one of the spoils of war. Thanks to them, Two Flower now had new toys to play with every day. Two Flower had also become the tyrant of the kindergarten. Fighting against each other, fighting against each other, fighting against each other, fighting against each other, fighting against each other. This was a step-by-step process. Ren Baqin shifted his gaze away from Two Flower and welcomed the sunlight that shone through the shade of the tree, enjoying a rare break. Being a national leader was much more tiring than working. There were at least 2 days of rest after working. When was the last time he had a break? The Empress brought Qing Yuan and Hong Luan over and sat beside Rinba Qian. Qing Yuan put down the tray in her hands. There were 2 cups of fruit juice. Hong Luan was holding a jar of water in her hand. It was prepared for honeysuckle. She drank more water. The problem with Great Xia has been settled. Rinba Qian turned to the Empress and said, "This was the news that came just now. The problem with the Huabing Sword Tower had been settled. Using nuclear bombs to convince people was reasonable and irrefutable. Jiang Zixi surrendered. More than half of the more than 20 masters and disciples of several sects surrendered. Except for 3 people, the rest were lone rangers without families or sects to drag them down. They fled the moment the situation turned bad. As a lone ranger, he was indeed a cut above the rest when it came to escaping. Yet, out of the 3 of them they were only able to catch 1. They will set off in a few days. After all, now that the top experts of Great Xia had been gathered together, it was time for the next step. I intend to hold the meeting in the capital, Rinba Qian said. The Empress's gaze didn't leave Lu Hua, but she heard what he said and said faintly, "You decide." She had never cared about these people. It was just that Rinba Qian felt that it was meaningful to do this, so she let him do whatever he wanted. The Empress changed the topic and asked, "You mentioned before that radiation might cause plants and animals to mutate and produce some monsters, right? Why did you suddenly mention this?" Rinba Qian had a bad premonition. Some monsters have appeared in the 60,000 mountains. Their strength is average, but they are very aggressive. The villages in the vicinity have suffered many casualties. The Protectorate of the South has already sent people to clear them out. Rinba Qian couldn't help but ask, "Are you sure it's caused by the radiation from the nuclear bomb?" In any case, it appeared nearby recently. Although he couldn't confirm it, he felt that it was very likely. The territory of Cardinal Heaven-level beasts was huge, and they rarely appeared in the outer and middle regions. 4 of them appeared near the nuclear bomb explosion, so it was likely that they had mutated due to radiation. Are they difficult to deal with? Since the Empress said that their strength was average, Rinba Qian reckoned that they weren't weak. Otherwise, the Empress wouldn't have mentioned this matter. At most, she would have asked someone to show him the details. So far, we have discovered 4 Cardinal Heaven-level beasts. 4 Cardinal Heaven-level beasts weren't considered much to the Aboriginals. However, his brother-in-law was still in the depths of the 60,000 mountains, and it would take at least 2 months for him to return to the outer regions. The forces of the Protectorate of the South in the outer regions were definitely no match for those beasts. What do those beasts look like? How intelligent are they? A spider, a snake, a green-eyed eagle, and a worm-like beast. At present, the Protectorate of the South doesn't have enough strength to test them. According to our observations, their intelligence is similar to that of a beast. The most important thing is that they have a certain community. Currently, that spider has occupied a valley near the area where the nuclear bomb was detonated. There are hundreds of spiders the size of wash basins. Although they aren't strong, they are very poisonous and hard to kill. To be able to develop such a large community, it should have been some time. Why did they only discover it now? Rinba Qian was puzzled. Previously, he had arranged for people to patrol the area because he was afraid that such a situation would occur. The Empress looked cold and didn't say a word. Rinba Qian could tell from her expression that someone had probably neglected their duty. Relocate the nearby villages that were affected, Rinba Qian said after some thought. The Empress had ordered many times, but not many villages were willing to relocate, especially those near the outer regions of the 60,000 mountains. This was an opportunity. "We can only do that for now," the Empress said as she sipped her juice. "In 1 month they will be going to clear out the newly discovered villages anyway, so we can settle this while we are at it." After they finished talking about business, they sat there and watched Two Flowers play with her axe. The Empress couldn't stand Two Flowers' clumsiness and took the initiative to give her some pointers. Although the Empress was used to fighting empty-handed, at her level of strength, she could play with any weapon skillfully. It was enough for her to teach Two Flowers. Rinba Qian looked at the big and small pair with a smile on his face. Half a month later, the top experts, including Jiang Zixi and the others, took a train to Lan City and then took a truck to the capital. The Empress and Rinba Qian were already waiting for them there. The things they saw along the way amazed them. Trains, tractors, trucks, and some other messy things. The changes in Dayo surprised them. Compared to Great Xia, which had been at war for several years, Dayo was much more prosperous. When they arrived at the capital, there were high-rise buildings everywhere. The wide roads, pedestrian crossings and neat green belts gave them a great shock. Even Great Xia couldn't compare to this place. It was hard to imagine that this was the capital of the barbarians. In comparison, Great Xia seemed more like the barbarians. However, the most attractive thing wasn't these, but the slogans hanging on the roadside. If you don't die from jumping off a building, the Public Order Department welcomes you. It's strictly forbidden to throw children from the second floor or above. If you want to get rich, have more children and plant less trees. Domestic violence is prohibited. If you can't avoid it, go to the arena. Beating children while eating, sleeping and eating. Children, do I agree? Looking at these slogans, even those who had been to Lan City before had a strange look on their faces. This was really full of the style of Zhao Prince Consort. Only Lin Dong had a look of admiration on his face and felt that this was a good idea. Even if most of them were illiterate, as long as someone repeated the things on these slogans every day, the content would be engraved in everyone's heart. Baidu search 081 Chinese network yen. No advertising slogans. While Rinpochen and the others were playing cards and discussing business, the other experts were either resting or strolling around the city. The mountain people who came to this city brought some things from the 60,000 mountains, which were very common to them. However, in the eyes of the aboriginals, it was a novelty. They could often exchange for things they needed from the Yun Nation or the Jing tribe. As a result, a spontaneous night market had formed in the imperial capital in just a few months. There were many people in the night market. After all, most people had nothing to do at night. Many people brought their useless things to the night market to exchange for some necessities. Young Master Feng had just come out of the night market with his maidservant. The maidservant was carrying a lot of things, all of which were harvested from the night market. Not long after they walked out, they saw a group of people gathered there. At the same time, they could hear a single word or phrase coming from the crowd. There was no connection between them, which made them a little curious. After walking forward, they discovered that there was a huge white screen in front of the crowd. On the left side was the word 9, and on the right side was a pen that was slowly writing the word 9. 9, commonly used as a number, is written as. A woman's voice was heard throughout the crowd. Young Master Feng looked at what was displayed on the huge screen with a strange expression on his face. Young Master, are they in hell? The maidservant was also very surprised as she didn't expect to see such a scene here. Young Master Feng nodded slightly. He was very surprised by this scene. He had never seen such a thing in Great Xia. He didn't even think that they would actually teach illiterate people to read on the streets. Moreover, this language was completely different from the language of Great Xia. What was Zhao Prince Consort trying to do? Young Master Feng looked around the crowd and found that from time to time, someone in front of him was adjusting a box that projected light onto the white screen. Every time the box was adjusted, the image on the screen would be affected. The sound came from the two boxes next to the screen. The next day, young Master Feng looked for Rinpochen and asked him about this matter sincerely. He was very curious about Rinpochen's purpose. This was because no one had ever done such a thing before. This is because people learn faster after they become literate. Even if they don't have anyone to teach them, they can spontaneously learn some things and then serve the imperial court. At the same time, after learning, their abilities would also become stronger, and they would be able to do some things that only scholars could do. In fact, when they learn to read and write, they are already scholars. Does Your Highness need a lot of scholars? Although there aren't many aboriginals, the Yun Nation uses a lot of them. If possible, I would prefer that everyone be literate so that they can do more things. If everyone can really be literate, then ordinary people can shine more brightly, and this world and this society will undergo changes that will surprise me. Young Master Feng was still a little puzzled. As the saying went, rulers wouldn't let the people know too much. However, here, Zhao Prince Consort was trying to get everyone to learn how to read. Every day there were people who were responsible for explaining the content of the newspaper. Zhao Prince Consort's thinking and approach were completely different from the officials of other countries. Young Master Feng could vaguely guess what would happen, but he still had to wait for time to ferment and see with his own eyes if it was the same as what he thought. Just like what he and the maidservant had said before, Zhao Prince Consort could be considered an outstanding person. Young Master Feng believed that he could completely crush Zhao Prince Consort in terms of martial arts. However, in other aspects he wasn't better than Zhao Prince Consort. It could even be said that Zhao Prince Consort was much more brilliant than him. Therefore, he wanted to see what kind of changes Rinpoche's actions would bring to this world. The meeting lasted for a week before the experts split into two groups. One group consisted of more than 70 people, including Li Fu, Jiang Zixi, Ma Hongyu, Su Gongso, and the others. They headed to the 60,000 mountains to join Qi Ziding in clearing out the villages of the foreign races. The other group consisted of Li Yuanzhu, Lin Dong, the Blood Fusion Ghost, Young Master Feng, and a few other experts from the Yun Nation. They would return to the Great Xia River and the Yun Nation to establish a talent selection network. Needless to say, Li Yuanzhu was a world-renowned expert with a calm and gentle personality. She was the most suitable person for this task. Lin Dong was the leader of a cult and was very knowledgeable in many aspects. He was also adept at bewitching people. The Blood Fusion Ghost was an active member of the organization. Young Master Feng wasn't considered very strong and was of course only among these people. However, he was very interesting. He had friends all over the world, from peddlers and pawns to top experts. At least 1/3 of this group of people had dealt with him before. In addition, there were a few top experts from the Yun Nation, and they were the first to join the organization. After all, even the Yun Nation had been destroyed by Dayo. Their roots were in the Yun Nation, so how could they say no? These people could establish a preliminary network in Great Xia and the Yun Nation to tap talented young people. The organization would provide them with a certain amount of resources to train them, and it would depend on their luck as to how far they could go in the end. Even though it was much easier to practice martial arts in this world than on Earth, it was still extremely difficult to be called an expert. Great Xia and the Yun Nation had a population of 400 to 500 million, but there were only 50 to 60 spirit wheel experts who had condensed heaven-grade weapons. Talent, resources, luck, and temperament were all indispensable. Only those who possessed these would be able to shine brightly in the future. Of course, the others were not completely useless. According to Rinpoche's plan, these people would be the main force to restrain the foreign races in the future. Mobile Reading Access, M. Chapter 1077. 2 months after the experts left the capital, Rinpoche and the Empress finally moved into the new palace in the capital. Subsequently, the 6 departments also moved in. With the relocation of these departments, the capital became a veritable imperial capital, the political and economic center of Dayo. The docks and railway tracks next to the capital also made it one of the most important commodity distribution centers. The migration of hundreds of thousands of people, the migration of court officials, and the merchants who had heard the news made the capital prosperous in a short period of time. Of course, the opposite of prosperity was the conflict between the ethnic groups. There were conflicts between the Aboriginals, the Jing tribe, and the people of the Yun Nation. Even though the Empress punished them severely, it would still take some time for the reckless and upright Aboriginals to settle down. However, Rinpoche didn't pay much attention to this matter as there were too many things he needed to pay attention to. For example, the 2 groups of experts who were sent out. For example, the various products from the Department of Commerce. For example, the 2 primary schools and 1 night school that were being prepared. For example, the planned foot massage and healthcare street. He hadn't had the chance to go there yet. Your Highness, these have appeared on the market recently. Zhu Zhuo from the Department of Commerce placed a few things in front of Rinpoche. There were 2 glasses, 3 kinds of toothpaste, a bottle of perfume, a pair of sunglasses, and a packet of salt. Rinpoche knew at a glance that these things weren't sold by the Department of Commerce. The glasses looked similar, but the color was slightly green compared to the ones he sold, and he could see the presence of bubbles. As for toothpaste, the Department of Commerce sold teeth-cleansing toothpaste, and these 3 types were teeth-cleansing toothpaste, teeth-cleansing toothpaste, and teeth-cleansing toothpaste. Rinpoche looked at them strangely and almost laughed. He didn't expect that there would be a situation like Kong Shuai's instant noodles in this world. Sure enough, no matter which world one was in, unscrupulous merchants were the same. Rinpoche wasn't surprised by the leakage of technology and imitations. Including the glass, the technical content of these things wasn't high. Even if it was glass, there would always be a way to find out the production method after selling it for so many years. The people of the Yun Nation are very bold, Zhu Zhuo commented. It's not that they are bold but that someone made them bold. Rinpoche laughed. For example, although the production method wasn't completely confidential, it wasn't easy for the people of the Yun Nation to obtain it. Even if they could do it, they wouldn't dare to do it. As for who the people backing them up were, In any case, those big shots in the imperial court could not escape. Ever since he opened the door and allowed the government and merchants to collude together, this kind of abnormal combination of interests would definitely develop and grow. But it didn't matter. He had already released the method of making soap and the like. What the imperial court needed to do was to guide the development of the market and open up new markets, not monopolize every commodity. And the interest groups that colluded with the government and the businessmen got the best ticket. It was better to imitate things that he didn't care about and use them as the blood of this aberration to develop. It was better than colluding with officials and businessmen to come up with some crooked ways. Up until now, those people still had a sense of propriety, if they didn't look at those pirated brands. However, there were two things that absolutely could not be touched: salt and iron. These were monopolized by the state, and could be said to be one of the biggest sources of taxes for the state. Rinpoche picked up the packet of salt and twirled it between his fingers. It was a little rough. "Where did you get it from?" Rinpoche asked softly. He believed that no one would dare to sell this thing to Lan City or the capital. Recently, a lot of this salt has entered the market in some small and medium-sized cities and villages in the Yun Nation. The price is 50% cheaper than ordinary salt. Rinpoche nodded slightly. The price was 50% cheaper than ordinary salt, so ordinary people who weren't rich naturally liked it. However, this thing wasn't something that anyone could get their hands on. Anyone who touched it would die. "Got it, I will get someone to check. You have done a good job. As for the other things, let them sell them. After that, we will gradually reduce or even close down the toothbrush, toothpaste, soap, perfume and glass factories to develop other projects," Rinpoche said. "The glass factory is also going to be reduced?" Zhuzhua was a little surprised since the profits of the glass factory weren't low. "Reduce it by half." Rinpoche naturally knew that the glass factory could still bring in a lot of profits, but he really didn't have that much manpower on hand. The business was getting bigger and the manpower was getting more and more scarce. In any case, he had already made the most money. Now that someone had successfully imitated it, more imitations would soon appear on the market. Instead of competing with them, he might as well reduce the number of glass factories and only keep some factories with the highest profits, such as silver mirrors, or some factories that produced cans. The manpower from other factories would be transferred to participate in other projects. Even though the glass factory was owned by the royal family, the Ministry of Works still owned 30% of the profits. He had to inform Tong Jinya about the reduction of the glass factory. "By the way, you don't have to shut down the glass factory in Cliff City," Rinpoche reminded. Cliff City was by the sea and was one of the three major estuaries of the Yun Nation. At present, Rinpoche was asking someone to calculate the situation of the seafood in the East Sea. He was preparing to make these seafood into canned food. Especially things like kelp and seaweed, which were produced in large quantities and were cheap. They could replace vegetables and were rich in nutrients, which was the best. In his vision, the canned fish would be sold to the Yun Nation, and the canned aquatic plants would be sold to the mainland of Dayo. "Understood, my lord." Zhuzhua was an overseas returnee who took the initiative to seek refuge with Rinpoche. He would support all of Rinpoche's decisions and would at most raise some of his doubts. Regardless of whether Rinpoche answered or not, he would resolutely carry them out. After dealing with the matters of the Department of Commerce, he summoned an official from the Department of Education to inquire about elementary schools and supper. There were two primary schools, one for Aboriginal youths and the other for Jing tribe and Yun Nation youths. In addition to the construction of the campus, there was also the problem of teachers. Although there were intelligent robots, some teachers were also needed. Rinpoche already had plans for these teachers. They were the students who would graduate from the high school department at the end of the year. Half of these students came from ordinary families, and it was estimated that most of them would enter various departments. The teachers would be selected from this group of students. In addition to the construction of the campus and teachers, the most important issue was how to get the commoners to send their children to elementary schools. One had to know that not everyone in this world would eagerly send their children to schools when they saw the enrollment. For most people, schools weren't their goal. Even if they didn't have any tuition fees. For ordinary people, literacy wasn't the first choice. This was the case even in some poor places in China a few years ago. Parents were more willing to let their children do housework within their abilities to reduce the burden of the adults. When they were older, they would go out to work early to reduce the pressure on the family. Although this world was different, there wasn't much of a difference. If their aptitude was good, they would rather let their children practice martial arts or learn how to hunt. This was the case in Lan City in the past. With the development of the school and the emergence of various new products in recent years, the thoughts of the commoners in Lan City had changed a little. Chapter 1078. 2 months later, Rinpoche finally took the time to experience the brothels in the capital. The brothels in the capital were much larger than those in Lan City. Lan City only had the 4 major courtyards, but the brothels in the capital had many chambers of commerce from the Yun nation. The atmosphere was completely different from that of the 4 major courtyards, and it naturally attracted many aboriginal officials and children of officials. After all, many people like new things. Furthermore, the 4 major courtyards had already stopped doing prostitution under the order of the Empress, and the girls there could say, "I sell my body, not my skills." Wrong, they sold their skills, not their bodies. The brothels in the capital sold both their skills and their bodies. Rinpoche had heard about it several times and couldn't help but be tempted. He didn't do anything and just went to take a look. He made an appointment with Tong Jinya and a few officials from the Ministry of Works. Although his relationship with the other ministers of the 6 ministries was much better, it was still the most convenient to go with Tong Jinya when it came to prostitution. The friendship that came from this wasn't something that others could compare to. Moreover, he could take the blame at critical moments. The brothel street was called Zhangtai Street, which was located on the 3rd Ring Road. Rinpoche walked on it with 2 guards. It was a little early at this time, so there weren't many people on the street. Both sides of the street were different from other places. There were courtyards with peach and willow trees planted in the courtyards with their branches poking out of the walls. The windows of the pavilions in the courtyards were open, and the laughter of young girls could be heard from time to time, accompanied by stringed bamboo music. "Your Highness, we have arrived," the leader of the guards, Shirhu, said to Rinpoche. Rinpoche looked up and saw the words Fengming Court hanging above the courtyard gate. "Have you been here before?" Rinpoche felt that Shirhu seemed very familiar. Shirhu had a straightforward smile on his face. Rinpoche shook his head slightly. This bunch of guys with thick eyebrows and big eyes. None of them were good people. "Lead the way." Rinpoche snorted. The 3 of them were dressed casually, and Rinpoche was wearing a coffee-colored silk robe. This kind of expensive clothing wasn't rare in the Yun nation. Many important family members and wealthy merchants wore this kind of clothing. However, only officials or children of officials would wear this kind of clothing here, and they would have a strong family background. "Gentlemen, please come inside. Do you have a lady you like?" Immediately, a manservant welcomed them with a smile like a blooming flower. "Let's take a look." Rinpoche's expression didn't change. He had an appointment with Tong Jinya, but it wasn't time yet. Chapter 1079. Beside Rinpoche were 2 slender girls who were about 17 or 18 years old. Although they weren't very old, they were extremely beautiful, gentle, and charming. Their every move was seductive. It was no wonder that Fengming Garden had gained such a reputation in the capital in such a short period of time. Besides Rinpoche, there were also Tong Jinya, Feng Ho, Gui Hong, and other officials from the Ministry of Works in the room. All of them were bold and had 1 or 2 girls beside them. Compared to the others, Rinpoche was much more restrained. At most, his hands would occasionally touch the bodies of the 2 girls beside him. He didn't think too much about it. Although domestic flowers weren't as fragrant as wildflowers, the difference between domestic flowers and wildflowers was too great, so he wasn't really interested. At most, his mind was focused on drinking and chatting. While everyone was chatting and laughing, they heard cheers coming from outside the window. Rinpoche's ears twitched and heard an extremely familiar voice among the cheers. It couldn't be helped because the voice wasn't soft. Even in the midst of all the noise, he could still distinguish it. Rinpoche's expression suddenly became strange. "It can't be right?" Rinpoche's expression changed slightly. He got up and walked to the window to find the owner of the voice. "Young Master Rin, what are you doing instead of drinking?" Tong Jinya laughed as he hugged the 2 girls in his arms. In fact, Tong Jinya, Feng Ho, and Gui Hong were the same. At most, they could touch and hug women, but they couldn't do anything else. These girls from the Yun nation were like the most fragile flowers that couldn't withstand their bodies. Even if they could control their bodies, they couldn't control their essence. Even a man-wheel expert couldn't withstand it. Moreover, These girls had only learned some superficial martial arts and weren't even at the manwheel level. What they enjoyed was the gentleness and charm of these girls. It's fine. It's quite lively down there. Rinpoche waved his hand and looked down. It didn't take long before he saw a person who definitely shouldn't be here. She was standing on a stool and clapping her hands with a face full of joy. Rinpoche's expression immediately turned ugly. Honeysuckle actually came here. A dignified princess actually came to a brothel. If this were to be known by those big mouths behind him, the news would spread throughout the imperial court and become a laughing stock. Rinpoche's face was gloomy and uncertain. He was pondering how to avoid being discovered by those big mouths behind him. He wanted to chase Hua out and deal with her when he got back. Fortunately, Honeysuckle had snuck in and he was making a big fuss. The people in the brothel noticed him and a few of them immediately went over to ask. No one knew what the two sides said, but Honeysuckle instantly attacked. He punched a few people who looked like guards and knocked them to the ground. He stood there arrogantly and looked down on the other side. In this aspect, Hua was very similar to the Empress. If they could use their fists, they would definitely not use their mouths. When faced with a problem, their hands were faster than their brains. Knocking over a few guards was a small matter, but it caused quite a commotion below. Almost everyone noticed the little girl standing on the stool. Even the woman playing the musical instrument on the stage had her eyes fixed on him. After all, no matter how he looked at it, this little girl did not look like a guest who should be here. The brothel keeper naturally brought a few more guards over, but she didn't dare to make a move. After all, even a fool would know that he wasn't someone to be trifled with if he managed to defeat a few guards at such a young age. Rinpoche tilted his head and heard Honeysuckle pointing at them and saying something like, "I'm not leaving," and, "I want those few people." The latter part of her sentence was naturally referring to the women on the stage. If Tong Jinye revealed his identity and said this, the brothel keeper might even give them one for free and send them all to the Tong residence. However, how could the brothel keeper agree to such a little girl's words? Rinpoche sighed faintly. This child Honeysuckle was really troublesome. It seemed like he had to step in. Was it easy for him to drink wine with prostitutes? His plan was ruined by this little girl. He could imagine that half of the imperial court would be talking about a 3-year-old princess visiting a brothel tomorrow. Just as Rinpoche was about to go downstairs, something happened below. A few people flew in and fell to the ground. There were guards and there were also servants. Following which, a lady in red with a cold aura walked in slowly. Many people present immediately looked like they were watching a good show. It was obvious that this fierce lady was here to catch an adulterer. There was going to be a good show to watch. Many people were amazed when they saw the person who came. They thought that if they had such a person in their family, they would definitely not flirt outside. Many people's faces changed as they knew the identity of the person who came. Rinpoche could only smile bitterly at this time. The family of 3 was reunited in a brothel. In all his years of living, he had never seen anyone bring their family to a brothel. When Honeysuckle saw the Empress come in, she immediately shrank her neck, rolled her eyes and tried her best to hide behind someone else. However, how could she hide from the Empress? In a flash, she appeared beside her and pinched the back of her neck with one hand as if she was holding a little chick. Her other hand slapped her butt. Rinpoche heard the slap even from the second floor. Honeysuckle's facial features twitched and she tried her best not to cry. This slap from the Empress would cause her butt to be swollen for at least 3 days. Rinpoche shook his head slightly and returned to his original seat while the Empress wasn't paying attention. "What interesting thing did you see? Tell me about it." Tong Jinye laughed when he saw Rinpoche standing there for a long time. "I didn't see anything." Rinpoche shook his head. "If you didn't see anything, why are you still standing there for such a long time? Could it be that you have taken a fancy to a lady?" Tong Jinye laughed at the top of his voice. "Do you want me to arrange something for you?" "Sure." It wasn't Rinpoche who said this. A lady in red suddenly appeared in the room. She tossed the 2 ladies beside Rinpoche to the side and sat down beside him with Honeysuckle in her hand. "Sir Tong, you must arrange something for me. If you don't..." The Empress sneered. The atmosphere was very awkward. The Empress, Zhao Prince Consort and the Princess were all present. Rinpoche covered his face and didn't want to look at Tong Jinye. Feng Ho, Gui Hong and the others all looked down. "Ha ha ha ha, I was just joking." Tong Jinye laughed dryly. "Women aren't as fun as drinking." The Empress's face turned green. She flipped the table. The entire table, along with the dishes, was flipped toward Tong Jinye. Then she kicked the table with lightning speed and sent Tong Jinye flying. No matter what happened, beating up Tong Jinya was politically correct. Return to the palace. After saying that, the Empress disappeared without a trace. No one saw how the Empress came in or how she left. Her Majesty has gotten stronger. She's indeed the most talented person in 1,000 years, the Empress. Feng Ho and Gui Hong exclaimed in admiration. Ren Baqin looked at the hole in the wall and didn't look at anyone else. With his hands behind his back, he strolled back with a bleak look on his face. For the next week, the Empress didn't attend court and Ren Baqin didn't show up either. A week later, Ren Baqin's eyes were sunken, his face was pale, and he had lost a lot of weight. He looked like a tuberculosis patient. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Their appearances were slightly different from humans. They had 2 horns on their heads, and from this point, it could be seen that they were even more iron-headed than the Aboriginals. Most importantly, they had a certain level of mastery over thunder and lightning. At present, they were the only foreign races that had mastered the natural elements. Li Fu and Qi Ziding gathered together. There were 70 spirit wheel experts and more than 30 cardinal heaven experts, which added up to more than 100 people. The last time they attacked the Naga race, there were less than 20 spirit wheel and cardinal heaven experts. This time there were 4 times that number. Furthermore, there were experts like Li Fu who had reached the heaven and earth domain level. The night was still a sneak attack. Dozens of experts attacked different parts of the village. However, before they could rush in, the house in the middle exploded. A man with 2 horns on his head and a height of more than 2 meters let out a thunderous roar. "Who is it? All of you get lost." Before he finished speaking, he was surrounded by lightning and pounced toward the people in the village. With a series of explosions, the experts of the Thunder Barbarian tribe rushed out of the houses. There were only 100 people in the village, but there were nearly 20 Cardinal Heaven-level experts. This was a terrifying ratio. Clang. The chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was stopped in midair, and both sides exchanged blows before both were sent flying. Li Fu held a short rod in his hand. His face was black and his hands were numb. The moment they exchanged blows just now, he remembered a principle. Iron rods could conduct electricity. The chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was repelled. His eyes widened, and he saw that every expert of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was besieged by more than 2 experts of the same level. He immediately roared and his body grew bigger. His muscles bulged as if he was wearing a suit of armor. The lightning on the surface of his body also became brighter. He raised the iron rod in his hand and smashed it toward Li Fu. Die. Li Fu didn't fight him head-on. He turned his body and pointed the short rod at the other party's shoulder. The chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was alarmed. The short rod didn't seem very powerful, but it gave him a great sense of crisis. He immediately swept the iron rod over, and a layer of lightning appeared on the iron rod. The 2 of them exchanged a few blows, but Li Fu didn't fight him head-on. However, there were continuous screams in the darkness. This time, the elites of the human race were besieged by 2 or 3 people. The experts of the Thunder Barbarian tribe fell one after another, and the ordinary people were all suppressed in the first wave of attacks. In less than 7 or 8 minutes, only the chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe was left. A huge saber that was tens of meters long slashed down in the air, but it exploded in the middle when it came into contact with this ball of light. However, this saber also obstructed her for a while, and more attacks fell one after another. The chief of the Thunder Barbarian tribe saw the 8-armed race chief resisting the attacks and scolded, "Old witch, you don't need to be a busybody. Why aren't you getting lost with your cubs?" Although he was surprised that the 8-armed race, which had always been his enemy, would actually come to help him, he knew that even with the help of the 8-armed race, they still weren't a match for the other party. There were simply too many experts on the other side. First, set a small target, for example 1 second. Chapter 1081. Ren Baqin received the intelligence report with a gloomy expression. There weren't many changes in the purge of the Thunder Barbarians' village. The village was destroyed and the chief of the Thunder Barbarians was killed. Even the sudden appearance of the 8-armed race wouldn't change the overall situation. After all, they were the elites of the entire human race. If they couldn't even destroy 2 foreign race villages, the human race could forget about going back. 1 spirit wheel expert and 1 cardinal heaven expert each died, and 6 were seriously injured. The main casualties were at the hands of the chief of the 8-armed race. More than 60 Kismet Heaven experts died, and nearly 100 were seriously injured. These losses were bearable. The chief of the 8-armed race didn't manage to escape and died of exhaustion. The most troublesome thing was that the 8-armed race had scattered their people in advance. Although the Aboriginals had killed a group of them, no one knew if there were any who had escaped. If there were any who had escaped, the human race might have to face the foreign races in advance. As for the time, it depended on how long it took for the news to travel from the depths of the 60,000 mountains to the foreign races. It was said that the world outside the 60,000 mountains was several times larger than the 60,000 mountains. Rinpoche estimated that it would take at most 20 years for the other party to respond and send people over. At the very least, it would only take a few years before they would have to face the foreign races. Time was too short. He originally estimated that it would take more than 100 years. Now he could only plan ahead. First, he would let people pass through the 60,000 mountains, find suitable hiding places, and let some of the experts go there to improve their strength as much as possible. Next, he would have to improve the level of technology as soon as possible and develop more powerful weapons. In addition, the appearance of the 8-armed race gave him some guesses about the strength of the foreign races. Arms were the biggest distinguishing feature of this race. Ordinary people with 2 arms were at the Kismet Heaven level, those with 4 arms were at the Cardinal Heaven level, and those with 6 arms were at the same level as Li Fu. The Aboriginals called it Longevity Heaven. If it had 8 arms, then it must be a level higher than that. It was hard to estimate how strong they were. After all, even Li Fu had only just entered the heaven and earth level, and the strongest foreign races he had seen were only the chiefs of 2 small villages. This was the land of exile. Even if the foreign races weren't in the land of exile, they were at least on the periphery. There was no standard to measure how powerful the experts in the outside world were. With the Empress's strength, even if she couldn't take on an entire army by herself, she could at least take the head of an enemy general from a 1,000,000-strong army. In other words, if the outsiders attacked, the higher-ups of the human race wouldn't be able to resist at all. At the very least, one of them must be at least 1 level stronger than the Longevity Heaven or the Heaven Creation Earth region. There were only 2 people who could achieve that in such a short period of time. The Empress and Li Yuanzhu. Thunder rumbled in the sky outside. Heavy rain poured down and the sky became even darker. However, Rinpoche, who was in the room, wasn't affected much. After pondering for a moment, Rinpoche took the umbrella and returned to his bedroom. Halfway there, his lower body was drenched. The Empress wasn't watching the television series. Instead, she was reading a book attentively. The Empress had also seen the report that Rinpoche had seen. Rinpoche felt rather gratified as long as the Empress worked hard. Even if the Empress slept, her strength would increase. As long as she put in some effort, there would still be hope for the human race. Without disturbing the Empress from reading, Rinpoche walked to the back of the Empress and took a glance at the pictures in the book. He reached out to take the book and looked at the cover, 36 Skills of Rope Techniques. Rinpoche was deep in thought. He flipped the book from cover to cover, looked at the Empress and asked, "Your Majesty, what is this?" "You will know tonight." The Empress glanced at him charmingly. Rinpoche opened his mouth in surprise and asked, "Your Majesty, is this the time to read this? I will be able to break through in half a year." The Empress said faintly, "You will need at least another 10 years to reach the spirit wheel level. Do you know what this means?" Rinpoche looked embarrassed and said, "It means that you will be a widow for 10 years. The Empress spat at him and stretched, showing off her perfect curves. That dual cultivation technique is indeed beneficial. Otherwise, how could you have reached the advanced level of the earth wheel level so quickly? It's the same for me. Although I have been suppressing it and haven't broken through, my essence blood has become more condensed. I won't be able to suppress it for another half a year. Take advantage of this time to do dual cultivation again. After that, it will be up to you." Rinpoche was speechless. In fact, he had benefited a lot more than the Empress. After every pair cultivation session, he would receive a surge of vital energy that would wash through every cell in his body. This energy would then be stored in every part of his body for his needs during cultivation. Otherwise, it would be good if he could reach the advanced level of the earth wheel level in another 10 years. This was why the Empress had been suppressing her strength. But what does it have to do with this? Rinpoche patted the 36 Skills of Rope Techniques in his hand. He could understand why the Empress was suppressing her strength and dual cultivation. However, what did it have to do with this thing? It can make me happy. The Empress got up and poked his cheek with her finger. It's very important for me to be happy. The future is too dangerous and you are too weak. Therefore, from today onwards, you will have to undergo special training. Rinpoche scratched his bald head. Special training again. His focus was no longer on the 36 skills of rope techniques. He had been beaten up by Tong Lan for several years. He had just relaxed for 2 years and it was starting again? Who was his opponent this time? Dual cultivation. Once every 7 days from now on. Rinpoche almost spat out a mouthful of blood. Dual cultivation. Once every 7 days? 7 days at a time? Is this your special training, Your Majesty? Your Majesty, haste makes waste. Rinpoche immediately said righteously. I feel that once a month is enough for me to improve. You need special training. I said it. Dual cultivation. Once every 7 days was just something the Empress said. According to the condition of Rinpoche's body, the recommendation given by the medical bureau was to have dual cultivation, once every 10 days. Furthermore, it required a large amount of precious herbs to barely support Rinpoche's body. For the next 6 months, Rinpoche had been undergoing special training. Every 7 days he could only drag his weak body to deal with various matters like a tuberculosis patient. Even with the nourishment of various precious herbs, Rinpoche's weight visibly decreased. He had dropped from more than 150 kilograms to 150 kilograms. One had to know that Rinpoche's skeleton was much bigger than before. His entire body was filled with muscles. At 150 kilograms, Rinpoche's body was like fine steel. Every bit of impurities had been completely removed, and his skin and muscles were more compact. His body's defense had increased by more than one level. His body had accumulated a large amount of essence energy, and every cell was filled with this extremely vigorous essence energy. If one didn't look at Rinpoche's expression, the effects of this special training were indeed extremely significant. For example, when the Empress used sarin gas in the 9 pavilions, ordinary people almost didn't have any chance to react. However, Earth Wheel experts could already persevere for 1 to 2 minutes, and Spirit Wheel experts could even survive for 10 minutes. It was just that most of their essence energy would be used to resist the poison, and their strength would be greatly reduced. The bodies of the Aboriginals were stronger, and the resistance of Kismet Heaven and Cardinal Heaven experts was much stronger than that of Earth Wheel and Spirit Wheel experts. As for the Longevity Heaven, most of the poisons had lost their effects and could only serve as an additional meal. From the results of the test, it could even be said that the Empress was only wearing a layer of human skin, and her essence had already completely evolved. The results of the test were shocking. If the Everlasting Heaven had such a terrifying strength, how powerful would it be above the Everlasting Heaven? Furthermore, the Empress wasn't considered to be at the top in Longevity Heaven. Longevity Heaven was divided into 4 levels, and the Empress had suppressed her strength for so long. After breaking through, her irresistible strength had increased greatly, even surpassing Li Fu's. However, she was only at the 2nd level of Longevity Heaven. Rinpoche began to feel that he had thought too simply. Nuclear bombs were indeed lethal to ordinary foreign races, but they weren't much of a threat to Longevity Heaven experts. Unless the other party was at the core of the explosion. However, with the Empress's reaction speed, it was almost impossible to blow up a Longevity Heaven expert. Only when the other party had just come into contact with a nuclear bomb and didn't know what it was could it kill a few of them. When the other party knew about the nuclear bomb, they could even use bows and arrows to blow it up in the air. Back then, the godly archers of Great Xia could shoot a grenade back into the wall, and the Empress could shoot down a flying sword. Rinpoche didn't believe that the foreign races couldn't do the same. After understanding the strength of the real experts in this world and discovering that the effect of nuclear bombs wasn't as desired, Rinpoche began to think about other weapons on Earth. However, after thinking about it carefully, he realized that the current weapons on Earth weren't suitable for this world. All these years, Rinpoche had been paying attention to the development of weapons on Earth. The biggest problem was that the powerful weapons were too big and too clumsy. For example, particle beam weapons. Although they couldn't be used in actual combat, there were still considerable research results. The biggest problem with such weapons were 2 points. First, they were too big. The huge demand for energy made it impossible for such weapons to be small. The charging time was too long, and it was difficult to aim at small targets that were moving at high speeds and changing directions. It would be a huge target if it was placed there. Furthermore, the particles would disperse in the atmosphere and have a very short range. As for laser weapons, they were also huge in size, but they were better than particle weapons in that they could be used for long-range attacks. However, they needed satellites in space to refract them. Not to mention the problem of satellites, this kind of attack wasn't much of a threat to experts who could move at a speed several times faster than the speed of sound on the ground. As for microwave weapons, they mainly used electromagnetic radiation to destroy electronic equipment. In fact, the development of weapons on Earth over the past few years was mostly in the direction of destroying electronic equipment. Earth had already entered the era of electronic warfare, which was completely meaningless to this world. There was only one type of weapon that was suitable for this world and could pose a certain threat to experts: electromagnetic weapons. Due to the limitations of superconducting materials, electromagnetic weapons were currently not satisfactory, but this direction was also the most likely to be realized. It seemed like Rinpoche had to fully promote the research of electromagnetic weapons on Earth. He hoped that he would be able to obtain satisfactory results. In addition, he needed a spaceship that was large enough. Even if it was a spaceship in the atmosphere, he could still escape with the Empress. This was very likely to be achieved. After all, Earth's current technology was already sufficient. They were even close to completing a lunar base and preparing to build a base on Mars. That night, there was a banquet to celebrate the Empress's breakthrough to the longevity heaven realm. Many of the court officials at the banquet praised the Empress's talent and strength, saying that she was the first in thousands of years. This wasn't an exaggeration. After all, the Empress was only 34 years old. She had broken through to the second level of longevity heaven at the age of 34, so it wasn't an exaggeration to praise her. Only the Empress wasn't very happy. She looked at everyone coldly. "Do you think I relied on my talent? I relied on hard work. When you were sleeping, I was cultivating. When you were eating, I was cultivating. When you were indulging in debauchery, I was cultivating. Of course, I have talent, but hard work is the most important factor for me to be able to reach this stage. As an important court official, you have to work hard like me when you are about to face an unknown and powerful enemy. The so-called talent is just an excuse for you." Everyone, Baidu search 881 Chinese network yen. No advertising words. Chapter 1084. After reprimanding all the court officials, the Empress returned to her palace with a cold expression, still feeling dissatisfied. Rinpoche really wanted to say, "Don't you know whether you have a cheat or not?" Although he didn't know how strong Li Yuanzhu was, he knew how strong the Empress was. She reached longevity heaven at the age of 34 after giving birth and suppressing her strength for a long time. She broke through to the second level of longevity heaven. She could increase her strength 24 hours a day even while sleeping. This talent wasn't just a cheat, but an extremely bad one. The Empress was like some mythical creatures such as dragons or other mythical beasts. Even if she didn't cultivate, her strength would increase to a certain level as she grew older. If it wasn't for the fact that she had given birth to a child and there was no reproductive isolation, Rinpoche would have doubted whether the Empress was of human blood. People like him relied on their own hard work and couldn't grow as fast as the Empress sleeping. The Empress sat on the couch while Rinpoche lay on his back. Recently they had been sleeping in separate beds. The Empress was afraid that she would accidentally slap him to death while sleeping. "I know why the late Emperor and father are leaving," the Empress suddenly said. Rinpoche thought about it and roughly guessed the reason. "Is it because you can't improve here?" The Empress glanced at him and didn't expect him to understand so quickly. She nodded and said, "Yes, I've realized that I can no longer improve here." Although the Empress had been busy controlling her sudden increase in strength, she immediately understood the impact this world had on her since her strength had automatically increased all the time in the past. Rinpoche knew that the Empress would sooner or later go to the other side of the 60,000 mountains to improve her strength. This was the plan, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. Rinpoche definitely couldn't leave. Although he could improve his cultivation speed by going there, technology was the capital to face the foreign races in the future. "Your Majesty, you should wait for them to open the passage to the 60,000 mountains before going there," Rinpoche said. Half a year ago, many experts had continued to go deep into the 60,000 mountains. On one hand, they were looking for the possible existence of the eight-armed race, and on the other hand they were looking for the passage to leave the mountains. At the same time, they were also looking for the villages of other races. However, the first 2 points were the most important. It wasn't expected to take too long. After all, it had only taken the human race 3 years to cross the 60,000 mountains. At present, everyone was already in the depths of the 60,000 mountains. Even a spirit wheel expert would need a year to reach this place. Now you despise me? Get lost. We will set off when you are ready. Set a small goal first, such as 1 second. Remember, booksellers. Chapter 1085. After another 3 days, the Empress was ready to set off for the Emperor's tomb. The tomb was located in the middle of Great Xia, and it was reasonable to travel light. However, Great Xia was in chaos now, and they had to pass through the territory of the Revolutionary Army before reaching the imperial court. The Empress didn't hide her identity and brought 1,000 winged cavalry warriors with her. Presumably, neither side would be stupid enough to provoke her. Anyway, even if they were stupid, they wouldn't be able to defeat them. 1,000 winged cavalry warriors would require at least 50,000 soldiers to be a threat and 100,000 soldiers to encircle and annihilate them. Not to mention there was also the Empress, who was the third most powerful expert in the world. Both sides had been fighting for several years, so how could they have the strength to spare? The group of more than 1,000 people didn't carry the Empress's flag, but with her imperial carriage, the winged cavalry warriors could recognize them at a glance. Naturally, no one knew who was in this group. After more than 10 days, they arrived at the border between Dayo, the Yun nation, and Great Xia and turned north. After all, there wasn't any danger on this trip, and she was allowed to follow along to gain experience. The most important thing was that they didn't know what kind of trouble she would cause if she was left alone in the palace. Rinpoche flipped through Li Fu's godly rod along the way. Speaking of which, Li Fu called it a weakness. In his opinion, everything had a weakness, and this weakness was the point of death. As long as this point was hit, even an ordinary person could break a rock with his finger. Previously, Rinpoche had been tempted to understand some of this, but unfortunately he hadn't mastered it. Now that the Empress had reached longevity heaven, her destructive power was at most a few hundred meters and could at most break a small hill. It was completely incomparable to Li Fu's ability to break a mountain with one strike. In any case, Li Fu couldn't surpass the Empress in strength. In that case, the problem lay in this rod, which wasn't much different from his strength. Even the Empress believed that this technique created by Li Fu was terrifying and could be considered the strongest attack in the world. However, the Empress didn't think that she would lose in a real fight. In any case, she didn't think that she would lose. However, this was enough for Rinpoche to get excited and pick up the secret scroll to study and practice again. Lin Dong was already waiting at the border. Both parties met up. When he saw the Empress in the imperial chariot, his heart immediately tightened and he felt a sense of panic. It was as if the person in front of him could take his life with just a wave of her hand. Even if the other party didn't do anything, his back was still drenched in sweat. The last time he met Qi Zixiao, he did not feel this way. Although she was strong, she could only make him feel a little pressured. But now, Lin Dong asked in astonishment, "President, did you make a breakthrough?" Originally, he would have called the Empress by her name. After all, she was an expert of the same level. Even if he wasn't a match for her, he wouldn't lower his status. But now, the feeling that the Empress gave her terrified her, and she subconsciously changed the way she addressed her. Furthermore, he couldn't address Qi Zixiao as Her Majesty. After all, he wasn't from Dayo. Thus, he simply called him President. In any case, Qi Zixiao was currently the leader of Go Home. "Leader Lin, you have a good eye." The Water Empress nodded. Even though he had already guessed it, Lin Dong was still shocked to hear the Empress admit it. For thousands of years, there were very few people who had reached this level. However, the person in front of him had reached this level in his 30s. His talent was truly astonishing. In fact, everyone who reached the spirit wheel level was a genius, and those who could condense a heaven-grade weapon were geniuses among geniuses. However, Lin Dong had no choice but to admit that they were merely geniuses of this era. Over the past thousands of years, there had been countless experts like them. People like Qi Zixiao were considered to be at the forefront even among the countless heroes over the past thousands of years. Lin Dong was both shocked and envious. At his level, how could he not yearn for a higher level? "Congratulations, President. Now it's a joyous occasion for the human race," Lin Dong said. He didn't compliment the Empress's talent, or else she might have corrected him. "President, now that you have advanced a step further, the success rate of opening the tomb of the human emperor will be much higher. Lin Dong smiled. This was also what Rinpoche and the empress thought. The things left behind in the tomb of the human emperor were naturally left for future generations to open. In this world, the highest level one could reach was longevity heaven or the level of opening heaven and earth. As such, there was a high possibility that one could directly open the tomb. If the empress couldn't open it, then no one in the human race could. Seeing the empress, Rinpoche was completely relieved. Li Yuanzhu had previously informed Rinpoche that she wanted Li Fu to make a trip. At present, Li Fu was still leading the team in the 60,000 mountains, but Qi Zixiao had also broken through to this level. Afterward, the empress asked some questions about the tomb of the human emperor, and Rinpoche listened for a while before the team set off again. At first, Rinpoche thought that he would soon encounter the volunteer army. Even though the war was at a critical juncture and they couldn't split their troops, the volunteer army would more or less deploy some troops at the border. He didn't expect to see any sign of the volunteer army after walking for a whole day. Rinpoche thought about it and knew that it was most likely Lin Dong's arrangement. After all, he was the leader of a famous evil sect and he still had this bit of strength. He wouldn't believe that there weren't any of his people in the volunteer army. Sure enough, Lin Dong found Rinpoche soon after. Compared to facing Qi Zixiao, it was more convenient to deal with the weak, reasonable, and intelligent Rinpoche. I have transferred the patrolling troops away, but there are too many people ahead, so I can't hide it. To be honest, I originally thought that you would travel light. Lin Dong smiled. Thank you, Chief Lin. Rinpoche cupped his hands and smiled. The empress could ignore Lin Dong but he couldn't. However, he changed his tone and asked, even if they know, what can they do? Lin Dong nodded and replied, indeed. Not to mention your strength, just the 1,000 winged cavalry warriors are enough to make everyone give up. In this way some people will definitely follow, but it doesn't matter. After the emperor's tomb is opened, it doesn't matter if they find out. Both sides understood this, but Lin Dong still had to greet them. As expected, they were observed from afar before they even reached the first city. Moreover, it was the general of the volunteer army who was observing from afar with 2,000 cavalry warriors. After discovering the identity of this group, he sent someone to inquire. Unfortunately, they were thrown out before they could even see the empress. If the other party had come in person, Rinpoche might have met him. After all, he had a cooperative relationship with Su Qing. However, the other party actually sent his subordinates to inquire, which was an insult to the empress's status. Although Rinpoche could understand that the other party didn't dare to take risks, it didn't mean that he could accept it. The other party didn't know the empress's intentions and didn't dare to approach, so he followed from afar. The news of Qi Zixiao leading 1,000 winged cavalry warriors to Great Xia quickly spread to Su Qing and the others. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.